Boulder City Council. I'm going to go ahead and call us to order and ask for a roll call, please.
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. We'll start tonight as usual with Councilmember Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Present.
Friend.
Here.
Joseph.
Present.
Spear.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Wallach.
Present.
Councilmember Weiner.
Present.
And Yates.
Here.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Thank you, Alicia. Just to lay out the format for this evening, we have one public hearing for this special meeting, and that is our mid-year board and commission appointments. And once that's complete, I'm going to close the special meeting and then hand the virtual gavel over to Councilmember Yates to then have lead our study session afterwards, which has 2 items. And I'll let him talk about those when we get there. So for now, if we can go to our one and only public hearing, please.
Yes, sir. Tonight's public hearing is item 3A on the agenda. It is the 2023 midterm boards and commissions appointments.
Nuria, do you want to give us an intro?
I actually think you don't even need me today because we are in great hands with our clerk's office as we think about that. So Alicia, I will send that right back to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So good evening, Council. Alicia Johnson, your City Clerk and Records Manager. And before we begin this process of nominating and appointing board and commission candidates to fill our current vacancies, I'm going to go ahead and provide an outline of our process for this item. There are 2 steps. First, we will present slides of each board and commission, identify which seats are vacant along with their required qualifications, the eligible candidates, and whether they have applied to any other boards. The second step, I will ask the mayor to open our public hearing, close it when it's completed, and turn the discussion back to me to provide council with guidance on how the nomination and appointment process will proceed. Emily, if you would please present the slides, we will go over the boards and commissions open seat vacancies. Next slide, please. Our first board that we are seeking appointments to is our Environmental Advisory Board. We have seat number 2 that's available, and that is to appoint a member to an unexpired 4-year term through March 31st, 2027. Seat 4 is to appoint a member to an unexpired 1-year term through March 31st, 2024. We have 4 applicants for these 2 seats. We have Hannah Davis, Richard Giosia, Greg Hill, and Alan Lewis. Next slide. Next, we will look at our landmarks board. We have seat number 4, and that seat is to appoint a member to a 1-year unexpired term through 3/31/24. We have 2 applicants, Renee Globiak and James Lindberg. Next slide. Our open space board of trustees is next. We have seat number 3, and that is to appoint a member to an unexpired 2-year term through March 31st, 2025. We have 5 applicants for this 1 seat. We have Bruce Feinberg, John Gersel, Keith Musselman, Mason Roberts, and Harmon Zuckerman. Next, please. We have next our University Hill Commercial Area Management Commission. We have 2 seats available for appointment. Seat number 2 is to appoint a member to a 5-year term through 3/31/2028. This seat is for a property owner or representative of a property owner, as with seat 3, with the same terms and the same requirements. We have 1 applicant for either of those seats, which is Tel Jones. If there is no questions or any information needed, I will now turn it over to the mayor to open and close the public hearing. Mayor Brockett.
Thank you so much, Alicia. So if we can open the public hearing, please. I understand we have 1 person signed up to speak, so that individual will get 3 minutes. Lynn Siegel, you're up.
I will look for her. She doesn't seem to be present.
Yeah, I don't see her in the lists.
No, she isn't present tonight, sir.
Okay. Sorry, Lynn, we'll catch you at another meeting. I will then go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to council. So let's get started. If we can, I think it might be helpful to have the slides up for this. On the other hand, it would be helpful to be able to see people's faces so I can see raise your hands. So, but why don't we start with the slides so we're all on the same page, if we could, please.
And Mayor, if I will note, please, John Morris is also joining us tonight, and he will keep track of the nomination and the appointments in the Zoom chat. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. All right, and I can actually see you all pretty well. I'll just ask you to hold up your hands for a while when we do voting. All right, so we have the Environmental Advisory Board, 2 seats available. I think we generally will start with the longest term first. So seat number 2 of an unexpired 4-year term. I'll accept nominations from the floor. Nicole.
Thank you. I wanted to nominate Hannah Davis. I was very impressed with her professional background. I think it's important that we have as the kind of the main woman who applied here. I think she brings an interesting perspective there, especially being a mom with young children there as well. She seemed like with her professional background and her personal experiences, she would be a really good person to have joining this board.
Very good. Any other nominations? Mark.
Yeah, I'm going to nominate Richard Giosia. He seems to have an extremely substantial background in environmental issues. And I think he'd make a wonderful addition to the board, just based on technical capabilities and experience in the field.
Okay. Any others? Seeing none, does anybody else want to speak to this, or I'll just call on myself here. I'll just say I thought Hannah Davis's application and interview were both stellar, and I'm excited to be hopefully appointing her to the board. So I'll be supporting her this evening. All right, seeing no other hands, I will call. Please tell me, are we going alphabetical or backwards alphabetical for our start?
Well, and I just want to remind everyone, if more than one person is nominated for the same seats, we have a specific process narrowing the candidates down to one finalist. A vote of support will be held for each individual nominated. Candidates must receive a minimum of 5 votes to be declared the finalist for a vacant seat. And if the first round of voting does not produce a clear winner, the candidate with the fewest votes will drop from the nomination list. So in the order of nominees will be called either alphabetically or reverse alphabetically by last name of nominees, depending on the flip of my handy dandy coin. Okay, so I'm going to flip now. We will start with reverse alphabetical. And from this point on, I will alternate the order for all future nominee votes during the meeting where more than one candidate will be nominated.
Great. And then I'm going to ask Rachel, if it's all right with you, you can raise your virtual hand for your chosen person. I can see you in the participant list. So reverse alphabetical, we will start with Richard Giosia. All in favor? I got 1 from Mark, which means that goes to Hannah. So congratulations, Hannah, for being appointed to the 4-year term. And Matt?
I just want to say, like, it would have been nice if we could have voted in affirmation for Hannah, just based on, I know, just based on how stellar she did an interview and stuff. So I know it goes by default, but just wanted to put that out there.
Fair point. I'll ask. I'll go back. All in favor of Hannah Davis? Raise your hand. I got 8, and I'll do that going forward. Matt, thanks for the prompt. Tara, did you have a comment?
No, I want to do the next nomination.
Okay, we'll now accept nominations for seat number 4, the 1-year term. Tara.
I was also impressed with Richard Giosia, and he had a stellar resume, and I thought his interview was excellent. And he also did his interview from vacation, and I thought that was pretty impressive as well. So I'm going to choose him for for the 4th seat.
Okay. Any others? Nicole?
Thank you. I wanted to nominate Greg Hill for this 2-year term. I was impressed with him having been a wildlands restoration volunteer. I think it's always wonderful to have people who have conflict resolution and communication skills. I really appreciated how he talked about engaging more youth on this board. And I think his decades of experience as a computer network engineer just really give him an interesting way of thinking about these bigger issues. Also, I think it's notable that we have somebody with a disability who has applied for one of our boards. And I think this is a perspective that we are very often missing in our boards and commissions. And so I also think it would be wonderful to have somebody who brings that unique perspective in addition to experience working in this area.
Very good. Just to clarify, Nicole, it's a 1-year term,
Thank you. Sorry about that. I had written my notes wrong.
but well said. Any other nominations? Or comments? Seeing none, we can go ahead and vote. And this time we are in alphabetical order. So we will actually once again start with Richard Joshua. All in favor, raise your hand. Got 3. All in favor of Greg Hill. I've got 6. So we get the 1-year term going to Greg Hill. Congratulations.
Next slide, Emily.
Okay, so with the Landmarks Board, we've got 1 seat number 4 for a 1-year term. We've got 2 applicants. Would anyone like to make a nomination? Lauren.
Thanks. I really struggle with this one because these are both amazing candidates. Renee bringing the background of construction experience within our community to provide a deeper understanding of what the changes that this board requests and how it might affect the applicant. She was my pick.
Thanks. Any others? Nicole.
Sorry, I was going to offer comments, so I can wait on that.
Yeah, let's do nominations first, and then we'll go to comments. Nominations, Mark.
Yeah, I'm going to nominate James Lindberg. His background in the National Trust for Historic Preservation speaks well for his abilities to serve on the Landmarks Board, and I will support him.
Good. I won't ask for more nominations. Any comments? Nicole.
I was just going to note one of the things that I appreciated about Renee was also her work around energy efficiency. To me, this issue of how Landmarks fits with making sure that our buildings are energy efficient as we move forward felt like a really important one. And so I will be supporting Renee.
Anyone else? And Lauren, I think your hand's still up. I'm not sure if you want to say, there we go. Yeah, Lauren, do you want to say something else? No, down again. All right. Seeing no others, I'll just call myself an echo that we have 2 extremely well qualified applicants here. So we're in good hands. So reverse alphabetical this time. So all in favor of James Lindberg. I got 1, 2, 3. All in favor of Renee Golovic. Got 6. So congratulations, Renee. 1-year term goes to you.
Next slide, Emily. Thank you.
All right, Open Space Board of Trustees. We've got seat number 3, a 2-year term, and we have 5 applicants. Who would like to make a nomination? I got Tara, then Matt.
I would like to nominate Mason Roberts. First of all, he's done a lot of board work. He's a rock climber. He uses he also cares about species and management of the open space. So I think he combines the recreation part of open space with also caring about the species and all the details that you need to know to be a well-qualified on the open space board. So he's my pick.
Thank you. Matt?
Thanks, Aaron. I'm going to nominate Harmon Zuckerman. Harmon, I think his reputation sort of precedes him, having been on planning board, have been chair. And I think what's really critical here is, OSBT needs some help getting back on its feet and getting back to a high function after what's sort of been going on for the past year plus. So I think it's really critical that someone like Harmon can step in and kind of on day one already understand the functioning of boards, how it works, and the relationships with staff, and really get that board operating at a high level, which is what we need in our community. And I'm very confident that Harmon will bring his skill set, his knowledge to really get OSBT operating at the level that we've all come to expect, and we know that they're totally capable of.
Thanks, Matt. Any other nominations? Lauren?
Well, I just wanted to speak to someone who is already nominated. Should I wait?
Yeah, let's close the nominations and then go to comments if you don't mind. Mark?
Yeah, I like both Mason and Harmon, but I'm going to nominate John Gersel. He's got a very substantial background in the field. I think he would do an excellent job. He served on boards before. And so he would be my selection.
Very good. Any other nominations? Seeing none, if people would like to make comments. Lauren.
Thanks. I just wanted to speak to the nomination of Mason Roberts. I think, he is friendly, even-keeled, and really able to balance both sort of the big picture thinking and the deep dive into the nitty-gritty details and data analysis. And I think that will serve him really well on this board. I also really appreciate his ability to reach across the aisle and have meaningful discussions with people, no matter how they see an issue or whether that differs from how he sees something. So I think that also is something that we really need on this board. So thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Nicole?
Thanks. I will be supporting Mason as well. I just want to echo Tara's comments about his board experience. He was really thoughtful about this position, both in his application as well as his interview. I think his perspective as a young father with 3-year-old twins is an interesting one for the board. I really appreciated the lens that he was giving to ensuring equitable access to our trails and open space. And, to the point about open space needing people who already have 5+ years with city boards, that open space board actually feels like a really high functioning one to me, because they handled an issue that came up that was disrupting their board. And so this feels like a board where it is functioning very well as it's supposed to. And I think giving somebody who is new to city leadership is a really important thing that we can do here on council, just to make sure we're not kind of just moving people from one board to another, but really opening up the space in a way that's allowing more people to come in and serve on our boards and commissions. So just all around, I really appreciate Mason. I think this is a great board for him to go into. And I would like to see us opening up these spaces to folks who haven't served before, so that we can bring more leaders into our community. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Rachel?
Thanks, Aaron, for flagging my hand. I do think Mason's an outstanding applicant. I'm going to support Harmon for a couple reasons, as stated by Matt. I just wanted to emphasize that with open space, I think his perspective as a land use attorney, when so much of what they do is, involves land and land use, is a pretty awesome addition to that board. So that's one of the primary reasons that I'm supporting him. Thanks.
Thanks. Bob?
Yeah, I want to echo the comments of my colleagues. I think we got some absolutely outstanding candidates here. This is a very tough decision for all of us to make. I do want to just make the observation that this appointment tonight will be for really a 1.5-year term until March of 2025. But we have another appointment that will be coming up in just about 6 months, in February, March of next year. So I hope that whoever has applied for this 1.5-year position will consider applying for the full 5-year term. If they don't get appointed tonight, get a 5-year term in the spring. So I think we're going to get, over the next half year, we're going to hopefully pick up 2 of these great people.
Thanks, Bob. I'll go ahead and call on myself and say it's a very difficult choice for me. I feel like both Mason and Harmon would do a phenomenal job. I was very impressed by both of their applications and by both of their interviews. I think, I'm tilting for reasons that Matt and Rachel have stated. I'm tilting towards Harmon for this appointment right now, but I'll echo that I would strongly encourage Mason to apply again here in a few months. When the next position opens in the new year. And then just a shout out, former planning board colleague, John Gerstle, whose family history in the open space area is legendary. His parents helped get the initial open space tax on the ballot. So appreciate all your service, John. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. So I will go ahead and call for a vote. Are we on alphabetical now?
Yes, sir.
All right, so we'll start with John Gerstle. I got 2 votes. Now Mason Roberts. I got 3 votes. Harmon Zuckerman. I'm sorry, Jeannie, I saw you raise your hand for John already. So Jeannie, if you don't mind me asking, did you want to register a vote for John or Harmon in the first round?
It's all right. It's fine. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll keep you with John since that was your first vote then. So Harmon, let's try again on Harmon because I didn't get everybody's hands. I got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we got 4, 3, 2. So that will mean that John Gerstle will drop off as the 3rd place vote getter. And then I believe we switch to reverse alphabetical. So we would then start the second round with Harmon Zuckerman. All in favor? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And Mason Roberts. I got 3. So that seat goes to Harmon Zuckerman for the 1.5 years or so. 2-year term. Very good. Okay, this is a complicated one. Not sure whether to start with seat 2 or seat 3, but let's go for seat number 2, 5-year term. Would anyone like to nominate someone? Matt?
Yeah, I'll nominate Tell Jones here. As many of you may know, Tell's sort of a recent partner, become a new partner at the Sink and been a manager there for a long time. And the Sink's celebrating their 100th anniversary. And if any of you were at the documentary for the Sink, Tell got probably the loudest cheer of anybody when he was brought on stage. So loved by the employees at the Sink and loved by a lot of people that work on the Hill. I think he'd bring a great perspective with what he does at the Sink, but also how he's connected with folks in the community. And so I think he'd do a great job in the seat.
Great. Any other comments? I'll just call myself and say I was very impressed with him through the 100th anniversary celebrations of the Sink, and think he'll do a phenomenal job. So I think we can go by acclamation. All in favor, Tell Jones. All right, congratulations. Okay, so we have made all of our selections. So I would then invite a motion to appoint, to motion to approve the appointments that we have just selected.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we got a motion, a second. Any final comments before vote? Seeing none, I will ask all in favor of the motion. I got 9. All right, the motion passes unanimously. All right, congratulations to all the people appointed, and thanks so much to everyone who applied, and do definitely consider reapplications if you were not selected tonight. We had a wealth of talent available to us. And with that, 5 minutes ahead of schedule, I will gavel the special meeting closed and hand the reins over to Councilmember Yates.
Thank you, Aaron. So just for the record, this is we're now moving to the August 10, 2023 study session. We have 2 topics for tonight, both of them going to be presented by Community Vitality. me just make a couple of comments before I turn it over to Nuria for introductions. The first topic we'll cover, and these are both scheduled for 90 minutes. We may be able to beat that. First topic, it relates to University Hill revitalization, and the second relates to commercial affordability. With respect to the Hill, when I reviewed the slide earlier today with Community Vitality, I think we agreed that it's a pretty beefy set of slides, and there's a lot of information there. And so I think when Regan leads us through this, we're going to take a few pauses for questions. So don't get concerned if you have questions right away, because I think we're going to take 2 or 3 pauses in logical places and let folks ask questions of the presenter. And then there'll be questions for us at the end. The second presentation, I think, won't require that. If you have a really burning question, you need to interrupt, raise your hand, of course. But if you hold your questions to the end in the second presentation, that would be great. And then we've got some guests with us tonight. We anticipate that there's a possibility there may be some questions relating to transportation tonight on the University Hill presentation. It's a community vitality presentation, but Natalie Stifler was kind enough to join us tonight. So just know that Natalie's in the wings and ready to answer any transportation related questions you have. And then finally, the University Hill matter has been reviewed by UCAMC, to which board we just appointed someone. And we do have the chair of the UCAMC board, Cheryl Liguori, available if we've got any questions for UCAMC. And with that, Nuria, I'll turn it over to you for the first presentation.
Thanks so much, Council Member. And I'll try to keep it brief because we do in fact have a beefy or a set of 2 beefy conversations. So tonight we're focusing on our commercial areas, and it is certainly community vitality evening as we embark on this. Hopefully what we're talking about is how we continue to support the over 7,500 businesses that contribute to the vibrancy of our city. So it's an interesting evening because we're going to start a little bit more narrow and focus in on the University Hill area. And you'll see some overlap as we have those conversations and we widen out that lens and talk a little bit more broadly about the possibility of continuing to support a citywide affordable commercial program. So I'll send it to Chris Jones to kick us off more formally, but also wanted to note that we have a staff member who is not just coming to council for the first time tonight, but is actually coming twice. And it's a bit of a glutton for punishment. And I'm not quite sure how much Chris is going to have to pay her for doing double duty on her first time out. But I hope you give Regan Brown a warm welcome as she walks us through her presentation. But first, I'll send it over to Chris.
Thanks so much, Nuria. Good evening, City Council. Chris Jones, Director of Community Vitality. So delighted to be able to be here with you all this evening to daylight some work that we have been talking about for a while. You might recall back at the retreat earlier this year of the many work plan priorities that Community Vitality had for 2023. 2 of them were University Hill commercial area revitalization, and so we've been working really hard on that. And the other, another one of them was an affordable commercial program development. And so lucky Regan Brown, who's been with Community Vitality for about a year and a half, came to Boulder from New York City. I'm going to call it a double header. It's baseball season. We have a double header, and she will be rewarded later this evening. But really, just want to express my sincere appreciation to everybody who's been working on these efforts, and glad to just hand it over to Regan now, and we'll look forward to answering your questions and getting some direction from you all on our next steps moving forward. So with that, over to you, Regan.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Nuria. Hi, everyone. I'm Regan. It is my first time here at Council, but I'm very excited to be here this evening. And I'm excited to dive into Hill revitalization. I want to provide you with an update this evening on revitalization strategies for the University Hill commercial area, as well as our recommendations to implement broad strategies in the near term, followed by some longer term strategies that we're looking at specific to the 14th Street surface parking lot. And I believe, Emily, you're going to be sharing the slides, right? Thank you. All right, we can go right to the next slide into the agenda. So quick overview here. I'll start with some questions for council that were in the memo that I'd like you to think about throughout the presentation. Then we'll dive into a background, followed by key considerations that we used for analysis and informed our recommendations. I'll share some feedback that we received from the University Hill Commercial Area Management Commission, followed by an outline of next steps, and then we'll circle back on those questions for a discussion. So the first question asks if council supports staff's recommendation to prioritize broad district-wide strategies for the Hill in advance of redeveloping the 14th Street lot. Next, we'll ask council if they wish to direct staff to explore code changes that are specific and unique to the Hill. And then lastly, a question to see if council has any questions for us about next steps. We can go right into the next slide here. So I'd like to start by going over some notable characteristics of the University Hill neighborhood at large. The Hill dates back to the 19th century. It's full of rich history and qualities that make it unique to other areas of the city. It has a really rich music history, especially in the 1960s when there were several entertainment venues and concerts that drew large crowds to the area. And this includes Tulagi's, a well-known club and music venue on the Hill for 5 decades, which has since then been converted into a rental commercial space. It's known for its innovative and vibrant spirit, especially given its proximity to CU and that youthful student population. It's also unique in that it's very architecturally diverse, with Victorians, bungalows, mid-century modern classics found throughout the district and the neighborhood at large. And then lastly, it connects to really large populations. So we have the CU student population on one hand, and then a large residential community, and it connects them to a small 3-block commercial district. Next slide. And so now I want to kind of narrow in on that commercial district, the University Hill General Improvement District, also known as UGID. It's one of Boulder's special taxing districts. UGID and some of the key sites within the district that I'll be referencing on this slide can be seen here on the map on the left-hand side of the slide. It was established in 1970 at the request of property owners who wanted to tax themselves in order to purchase land that could provide customers with additional public parking spaces. And one of those parcels of land is the 14th Street surface parking lot and is the only remaining general improvement district-owned lot in the commercial district. UGID recently sold its other parking asset in 2021, the Pleasant Street lot, to facilitate the development of the Hill Hotel. So ultimately, this significantly reduced the number of public parking spaces on the Hill and reduced operating revenue for UGID. And as many of us know, there are several new developments underway on the Hill, which include the Hill Hotel and the CU Conference Center. And those will inevitably have an impact on the commercial district. But even in the face of this growth and development, UGID has experienced a state of economic stagnation for several decades. Community members have expressed concerns of feeling unsafe. Residents have described a limited retail mix that caters maybe a little too heavily to that student population. And then connectivity to and from downtown and also within the district is a bit of a challenge. And so ultimately our goal is to formulate strategies that will generate really positive and long-lasting impact for the district. Next slide. So UGID has a set of ordinances that are unique in comparison to the rest of the city. And those key regulations are displayed here on this slide. I'll start with the one on the left. So due to concerns with alcohol overconsumption, City Council adopted Boulder Revised Code 965B in October 2013. And in summary, this requires that at least 50% of any eating place's sales on the Hill must come from the sale of food. And it's important to note that there's no other requirement related to this in the rest of the city. Additionally, these establishments must close no later than 11 p.m. unless they were grandfathered in. And another important note is that it's 2 a.m. for the rest of the city. And currently, as it stands today, there are no restaurants or bars on the Hill that are open past 10 p.m. unless they've permanently closed or adjusted their hours of operation. And then moving on to the ordinance on the right-hand side. So in 2015, Boulder Revised Code 963B was adopted to address the concern that the economic environment strongly favors rental housing within UGID, making it really difficult for other diverse land uses to compete in the marketplace, and ultimately posing a threat to the vibrancy of the commercial district. And so in August of 2014, Council passed a temporary moratorium, which was then extended in 2015 and subsequently changed to restrict all new housing within UGID to be permanently affordable. And so in summary, with what I just mentioned, the Hill is really it's more regulated compared to the rest of the city. And we've heard that from many businesses, especially regarding this ordinance on the left-hand side here. It's in fact fairly difficult to achieve because the restaurant industry really does rely heavily on the sale of alcohol as their primary source of revenue. All right, next slide. Safety has been an ongoing challenge within UGID and the broader Hill neighborhood, primarily stemming from that crowd and party behavior. And so the Hill Reinvestment Working Group, which was formed in late 2015 to pursue a Hill reinvestment strategy, has placed a lot of attention on the issue of safety on a more broad level. But we're still seeing that the commercial district is struggling with several challenges related to safety and crime. Local business owners have expressed their frustration around certain behaviors occurring in front of their storefronts and elsewhere in the commercial district. This includes panhandling, loitering, public drug use, etc. A recent effort to try to mitigate these challenges included a generous contribution from CU, providing an additional $45,000 annually to expand our ambassador program on the Hill. And so for those who aren't aware, ambassadors provide cleaning, safety, and hospitality services downtown and on University Hill. And it's also important to note improvement efforts such as a landscaping project that we completed at the intersection of 13th and Pennsylvania this past year, as well as ongoing coordination with the Hill Boulder Merchants Association on activations and business support and retention efforts. But even with these recent efforts, there are still opportunities for additional improvements to be made. Next slide. UGID Fund Health. There is limited capacity to fund general improvements with the district's property tax revenues, which amount to significantly less than our other special districts. UGID relies heavily on the general fund in contrast to the city's other special districts. The general fund transfer offsets UGID expenses related to general fund activities such as the EcoPass program and the administration and maintenance of the on-street parking meter program. Some funding strategies that have been raised in discussion to tackle this issue of UGID Fund Health and the challenges we're seeing include debrucing, which would eliminate UGID's mill reduction that results from the taxpayer's Bill of Rights, and it would provide the city with that full mill levy. Another strategy raised relates to establishing a downtown development authority, which could help fund general improvements and additional programs. And for those who are unaware, a downtown development authority is a strategy used to revitalize commercial districts, and it can provide for a variety of funding options, including millage and tax increment financing, ultimately for public improvements in commercial districts. And then There also continues to be interest in the possibility of establishing a business improvement district on the Hill. So that could provide long-term operating dollars to the Hill to support operations such as cleanliness and activations, things of that nature. And there are many trade-offs to be considered related to the reinvestment of the Pleasant Street lot sale proceeds. So right now, those proceeds are sitting in savings, earning interest, but delayed reinvestment of those funds only prolongs limited access due to the decrease in parking spaces and the redevelopment of the 14th Street lot, which could ultimately result in additional property tax, retail lease, or parking revenue. But on the flip side, according to current budget assumptions, reinvesting those funds in 2025 would result in a negative fund balance for UJIT by 2027. So it's important to take these trade-offs into consideration when we're considering any revitalization strategy. Next slide. And then we're also seeing business retention challenges on the Hill. The commercial district caters fairly heavily to that student population and has struggled for decades to attract a diverse mix of uses. As it stands today, there is a 14% commercial vacancy rate, and the business mix is depicted here on the right-hand side of this slide. So as you can see, there are several restaurants, but also personal care services, convenience stores, retail such as smoke and skate shops. So again, kind of catering to that student population. And some points of comparison that I'd like to call out, although staff is working on getting more updated data, so it's not necessarily precise in comparison, but still paints a picture of where the Hill stands related to other areas. So the retail vacancy rate for the entire city of Boulder, this was in December 2021, was at 4.7%. And then nationwide in the US, vacancy rates across the retail sector hit an average of 4.4% in the second quarter of 2022. So again, in comparison to other statistics for the city and nationwide, the Hill has a much higher commercial vacancy rate. And lastly, we're seeing a lot of closures over in the Hill over the past year, and these include a lot of well-known businesses, Rosenberg's, Albums on the Hill, Sherry's Soda Shop, Boss Lady Pizza, and more. Next slide. UJID has been the focus of several studies over the years. Some notable ones are outlined here on this slide, which I'll briefly go over. So starting on the left-hand side, the University Hill sub-area plan. This was a sketch plan undertaken in 1996 to build a vision for the community based on needs around public safety, connectivity, and economic growth. In 2011, we were awarded the Urban Land Institute Technical Advisory Panel Program. So we've been awarded this opportunity for the Hill twice now, and I'll dive into what this program really is on the next slide. But the purpose in 2011 was to assess revitalization strategies at the time for the district. And recommendations from that convening fell into various categories such as governance and programming. But again, this was over a decade ago. Many changes have occurred since then on the Hill, so it's a bit outdated, but certainly useful to build upon. The 2017 Central Broadway Corridor Design Framework. This is a guiding document recommending urban design improvements along Broadway, including how to better connect the Hill to downtown. In 2021, we contracted with Economic and Planning Systems, who conducted a feasibility study on the 14th Street lot. And the outcome of that, they recommended a primary strategy of pursuing market rate housing, which of course faces important limitations given the current regulatory environment and that ordinance related strictly to affordable housing within UJID. And then in 2023, our most recent convening with that technical advisory panel that occurred back in June. And so I'll outline some key recommendations from their findings later in the presentation. And we can go to the next slide. I do just want to take a moment here to give a brief overview of what the Urban Land Institute Technical Advisory Panel Program is, ULI TAP for short, since it was a really important part of our recent efforts, and again, with findings and recommendations from that convening shared later in the presentation. So ULI TAP is an opportunity that provides a matching grant from DRCOG to support 2 studies in 2 Denver metro communities. And the program provides awardees with a panel of volunteers with Urban Land Institute expertise to help us work through a pressing, typically land use related challenge. It's valued at over $20,000 and ultimately provides communities with recommendations that address a problem statement. In our case, we asked the TAP to address challenges that we're seeing on the Hill through redevelopment of the 14th Street lot, but also broader strategies, recognizing that tackling these challenges that we are seeing on the Hill really requires a multi-pronged approach. Okay, next slide. So I want to take some time to kind of tie it all together. It's important to understand why we're here now, why are we tackling this work now? Based on community and stakeholder feedback to city staff, we understood that many of the previous studies are either outdated or maybe they took a little too narrow of an approach on specific elements of the district. So revisiting broad strategies seemed appropriate, which was really the catalyst for us engaging with the Urban Land Institute Technical Advisory Panel Program again. As I mentioned, the district continuously has struggled with some of these economic and social challenges that I've outlined, from business retention to safety to funding concerns. The TAP brought up a really great point that once people exit the lobby, when the hotels are complete, once they exit the lobby, they'll choose to either go right or left, either downtown or to the Hill commercial area. So let's address these challenges and make the Hill more welcoming as we start to see this influx of visitors. And on that note, we see an opportunity to invest in strategies that complement the new developments that are underway. Rather than waiting to see how they'll impact the district, let's leverage them as an opportunity to be proactive and implement strategies that will be complementary to these new developments. And ultimately, it's time to act and it's time to respond to this increasing community desire to see positive change in a neighborhood that is very special to a lot of people. It has such a rich history. It's a really important part of Boulder's character. So let's build off those positive attributes and help it become that thriving place that our community desires. So with that, I'd like to pause here and see if council has any questions so far.
Well, thank you, Regan. And so we thought this would be a good time. That was a lot of information. And we thought this would be a good time to see if anybody has any questions about what you've heard so far around the history, around the past planning, around the economics. We do still have coming up a discussion around connectivity and transportation, around activation around the 14th Street parking lot, which Regan has alluded to. We're going to drill into that a little deeper. So if you have questions about those topics, just hold them. But if anything you've heard already, if you've got questions, this would be a great time to raise your hands and see if we can get some answers. Mark first, and I'm sorry, Matt first, then Mark.
Thanks, Bob. Regan, you're off to a hot start. You knocked that out of the park. So nice job. My question does center a little around history. And so I don't know if it's folks in CV or maybe Cheryl knows the answer or it dates back even further. But my question is really around the UGID, if I'm saying that right, the improvement district and its actual boundaries and why it perhaps didn't expand south to what now is the hotel, but there were over a half a dozen businesses present for over 20 some years. And so I'm just wondering why UGID didn't envelop that space. And then maybe going forward, what would be the process if it was the will to expand it to maybe to include the Hill and some of those businesses in between? So I'm just sort of wondering why it stopped where it did, and why, and whether or not we could expand if we felt that it was in the broader economic interests to do so.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'd like to defer to Chris Jones, if you're able to
Sure.
speak to that.
Absolutely. Well, and it might help to go back to that map. Those properties are actually in the general improvement district. So the map is a little bit deceiving. The only parcel that's not, the only commercial parcel that's not in UGID is the gas station. Given that use, they've never expressed an interest to join the district, but all of the parcels within that were formerly all those commercial spaces and now becoming the Hill Hotel, those are in the district. And always have been.
Thank you for clarifying that. The map was a bit deceiving. So thank you for that, Chris. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Thanks, Matt. Mark?
That was a very brave and very good performance. Thank you so much. I do have a couple of questions because the memo on this subject was a little confusing to me. We're told that there are grandfathered liquor licenses in the district that still permit 2 a.m. operation. But then later we're told that there are no establishments operating after 10 o'clock. What am I missing? Which is it?
So any business that was grandfathered in has either permanently closed or adjusted their hours.
Okay.
Hence why no business on the Hill is open till 11 or later.
And even the ones that are not grandfathered to 2 could operate to 11. Do you know why they're not taking advantage of that?
Chris, any thoughts there?
I'm sure you could handle it, but I'm happy to chime in. There are very few businesses left on the Hill that are grandfathered into the previous liquor rules, the Sink being a very prime example of one. And I think the business model and staying late, given a number of challenges that have been experienced, not just on the Hill, but everywhere, from staffing challenges to changing culture. The Sink staying open beyond 10 p.m. It seems it did not prove to be a good business model if the district itself is not attracting enough folks to stay busy and also keep employees in that space beyond 10 p.m. And so they've adjusted their business model, not necessarily in response to these regulations, but lacking an overall energy and people in the space beyond 10 p.m. They've elected to cut back. It doesn't mean that they can't expand again. But lacking that kind of group energy of multiple places creating that space, I'm not sure that would happen.
Thank you. In discussing the 2015 code changes that all Hill housing must be permanently affordable, can you define what the concept of affordability means? Is it a percentage of AMI that is required in all housing units? And second part of the question is, how many housing units have actually been produced with those restrictions?
I'm wondering if we have anybody on the call from housing that might be able to speak to that. But if not, I know that that we do define affordable housing pretty clearly through Housing and Human Services, and it would be tied to inclusionary housing requirements. There have been 0 housing developments on the Hill since that regulation was put into place. So 0 affordable units have been constructed as a result or after that regulation in place.
Somebody could simply email us, what the actual requirements are per that 2015 change in terms of what constitutes affordable housing. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Okay. And just a couple more questions. In the memo, well, when we have previously discussed this issue, we were told that the Hill Hotel would have a revitalizing effect on the neighborhood. As we're looking at new strategies, have we changed our perspective? Are we now thinking that the Hill Hotel is not going to have that impact? that it requires an intervention on our part?
Well, I think the idea, again, at least from my perspective, and Chris, feel free to chime in, but rather than waiting for these new developments to open, let's be proactive and implement some of these revitalization efforts now. We're already seeing gaps. We see the challenges. So let's take action now rather than waiting to see how the Hill Hotel will have that impact on the district.
Right, fair enough. Last question. The memo discusses the possibility of a rebranding effort for the Hill. Are we looking at that as a generator of better uses? Because it's unclear to me that someone's going to make a major investment decision simply based on a rebranding campaign. Can you speak to that?
Well, and a little bit, yes. So the language has since changed since we submitted the memo after feedback from UCAMC. Rather than rebranding the Hill already has a brand. We just want to identify. It's gone through so much evolution. There are upcoming changes. Let's identify what that district identity is and leverage it and build on it and promote it to the rest of the city. So it's more of identifying and enhancing the existing brand rather than rebranding the Hill.
And I'm sorry, one last short question. Have we spoken to CU and the Hill Hotel operators? I mean, how do they feel about the prospect of perhaps changing hours of operation for restaurants and facilities serving alcohol? Have they weighed in on this?
Chris, you've had conversations with CU, unless I'm mistaken. Is that right?
Yes, thanks for the question. We do have regular conversations with our partners at CU, and they are following our lead in this. They are interested in the success of the commercial district. They haven't necessarily made a specific statement, blessing one way or the other, as they want to leave it to the city to decide what the future of the district is, but certainly have not expressed any reservations about possible changes to those regulatory components. We have not had specific conversations with the folks building the Hill Hotel specific to the regulations, but we also know that they are very interested in making sure that their properties and their retail spaces in that building can be as successful as possible. And what we've learned from the businesses that are already on the Hill is that the regulatory environment has tended to lead new businesses to look elsewhere first before taking a risk to open up a business on the Hill.
Thank you. Okay, that's all I got.
Thanks, Mark. I think we're going to Lauren next.
Thank you. Let's see. I was wondering about the sort of financial strategies, and are there currently residential units within the commercial district, and do those pay into sort of the existing fees?
So yes, there are a number of residential units within the district, but given the low amount of the mill levy that is applied to for commercial properties, although there is a levy on residential uses as well, it's even less. So there is some revenue generated from the residential spaces, but it is by law a very small component of our overall property tax revenue for the district.
It just strikes me that not only do the businesses right there profit from potentially having a stronger urban character or identifiability, but also, the residential area, especially immediately surrounding. And so I was also wondering if we've put any thought into expanding the district to the residential area further, or what restrictions there would be on that.
So thanks for the question and idea. The governance around general improvement districts are pretty specific under state statute. The current district as it exists is was created to assume all of the parking liability for the commercial properties, so that the land uses in the Hill District didn't get coupled with a parking requirement. When we hear about parking code and parking minimums and parking maximums, in our general improvement districts, we do not have a parking minimum for any of those parcels. So using a GID approach for the residential area, not that we can't explore funding mechanisms. I'm not sure that just an expansion of the existing GID would be necessarily the path that would warrant exploration versus other possible tracks that could help set the area up for success.
Okay, I appreciate that. It does seem like a number of the residential areas also, I think of apartment buildings that have parking lots or no parking lots, that wouldn't meet our current requirements around parking in that area. And it seems like the parking strategy is probably beyond just the downtown, or beyond just the retail businesses. Okay, but thank you for that.
Well, and so there could certainly be a conversation about an adjacent district, but because of the difference between taxing levels for residential versus commercial, based on state law, we wouldn't necessarily want to have just one big district. And then, of course, there's a lot of trade-offs associated with the governance of our general improvement districts as it is, getting folks to volunteer to be on commission, for example. So glad to have Tell Jones, by the way. But thanks for the questions.
Thank you.
I don't see other hands. I did have a question, Chris, it's kind of follow up on the discussion you just had with Lauren. Is it possible for, I realize it requires a vote of the property owners, but is it possible for the Downtown Business Improvement District, is it legally possible for the Downtown Business District to encompass the Hill District, if that's the will of the property owners? Could you connect the two?
That's a really great question, and it's a concept that has brought up in the past. Not necessarily expansion of the downtown bid, but there is no limitation to the number of bids that can exist in a community. So the Hill could elect to start their own business improvement district. That has been a topic that's broached in the past, and Cheryl might be willing to speak to that actually. But the business climate on the Hill has not been conducive to additional taxing layers. But if we did come to a space where maybe we traded a general improvement district for a business improvement district, it's not necessarily an extension of the downtown district, but its own bid, they could still contract with the Downtown Boulder Partnership, which is a separate 501c3 organization, so that if that seemed right for the downtown bid to support the Downtown Boulder Partnership in contracting through the Hill bid, providing the same level of service, that's certainly something that's been discussed and a path that we could see a lot of possibility in.
Thanks, Chris. That's helpful. Seeing no more hands for you, why don't we move on to chapter 2?
All right, absolutely. We can go right to the next slide. So now I'll dive into some key considerations that helped inform the recommendations I'll be presenting. We can go to the next slide. So we've identified several key considerations that will help guide our work and decision-making around implementing specific projects and initiatives on the Hill. The first being long-term fund health for UGID, ensuring that any strategy that we develop really contributes to the long-term viability of the district. Parking and access, ensuring people are able to access the district, whether through an increase in parking availability or other forms of multimodal transportation, is an important consideration. Connectivity, getting to the Hill, whether through providing better connection along 13th Street or another mode, is another key consideration. And then lastly, economic vitality and resilience. It's important that any revitalization strategy contribute to long-term positive economic growth and resilience of the district. Next slide. Our recommendations were derived from our most recent convening with the Urban Land Institute Technical Advisory Panel, and they take the form of two approaches. So one approach that I'll be focusing on are these broader revitalization efforts that staff recommends implementing in the near term. And the other approach narrows in on longer term 14th Street lot redevelopment strategies. So we can go to the next slide. Three categories that our broad revitalization recommendations fall into, which include understanding and establishing a district identity, connecting, and activating the district. And I'll touch on each of these. We can go to the next slide. District identity, let's understand, establish, and promote the Hills identity to the city at large. Staff recommends taking time to engage with the community to better understand what the Hills identity is, again, given the evolution of the district and the upcoming changes that are coming online that may impact it. Once identified, let's leverage those characteristics and promote it to the rest of the city in a way that'll make it more identifiable and attractive to visitors. And then beyond enhancing the identity, the Hill would benefit from improved pedestrian wayfinding to help create a sense of place and community and help folks navigate the district. Next slide. Connecting UJIT. This suggests improving connectivity to better integrate the district with the broader community. Improving connectivity along 13th Street in particular aligns with suggestions from other city plans. Making the Hill easier to get to and improving navigation within the district is a need and an opportunity that we've heard repeatedly. We can go to the next slide. So along those lines of connecting the district, this map here was created by the panelists from the ULI TAP to really help us visualize how the Hill can be better connected to the rest of the city, including downtown. So as you can see, they suggest improved entrances along 13th and Broadway with that direct identifiable connection from Pearl Street all the way to Chautauqua. And I'm going to take this as another pausing point to see if council has any questions.
Thanks, Regan. So we thought, because there's probably some questions about connectivity and transportation, we thought we might take a pause here. And Natalie Stifler is on as well. So if we've got questions relating to transportation or some of our transportation planning on connectivity, this would be a really great time to ask them. Aaron.
Yeah, thanks. Regan, this is being extremely informative and well organized. Really appreciate what you're doing here. So just in terms of connectivity, this is actually a little outside the Hill itself, but we've been talking about the very great need for better bike ped connectivity from the Hill down to downtown, right? So this orange line that threads up to the north. Have we made any progress on thinking or planning on that? I know it's going to need to take a little while, but what's the current thinking about what our options are to make that connectivity?
Chris, do you want me to take that one? Okay. Good evening, council. Yeah, no problem. I'm Natalie Stifler, Director of Transportation and Mobility. Thanks for the question, Aaron. Yeah, so we've talked a lot about this kind of connection and how we can look at it. And I'll also note Kathleen King is here from Planning and Development Services tonight as well. Brad wasn't able to be here with us tonight. So feel free, Kathleen, to jump in here too. But, Brad and Chris and Allie and I and our teams have thought a lot about just how we can incorporate looking at this connection in all the upcoming work efforts that we have coming up. And one of the places that this is really going to, I think, kind of start to lift up is in the civic area work that we are getting underway with a consultant here soon. And the thinking is that we'll do somewhat basically like a multimodal analysis and placemaking study, because it's more than just like, oh, we just need a bike connection or a pedestrian connection. It really needs to be kind of a broader conversation about placemaking. We heard that through the TAP kind of conversation. And certainly as we think about the civic area and that connection from the hill to downtown, what do we want to kind of cultivate from a placemaking standpoint? So that's kind of our thinking from a work planning effort at this point, that it will be a part of that work, which will be kicking off later this year and then going through next year. So transportation and planning and parks and community vitality will all be a part of that effort. Kathleen, did you want to elaborate on any of that?
Sure. I might just mention the RFP for a consultant team to take that on is out right now, and we'll be getting proposals back from folks next week and reviewing those. But it's a really exciting opportunity. The other thing that we're talking about beyond just sort of the physical components of connectivity and the mobility aspects are the land use and zoning and some of the technical limitations of uses and redevelopment along these corridors. And so we'll be taking a look at that in our work plan next year as well.
It's great to hear that that work is being planned and is going to be underway before too long. I did notice you didn't use the word gondola in your answer. All right, I win the race for bringing that up first. All right, thanks so much.
Aaron,
Yeah,
you realize there's a drinking game going on.
I'll just say one more thing. We do recognize, because I think we've had some internal conversation about this, and I want to just kind of daylight it. We do realize that there will be kind of a more like near-term, immediate action items that we'll want to implement on like the more nearer term timeline, and then there's going to be more like grander ideas, right, around. I'm not going to say the word, but just grander ideas that will take more time. And we'll want to be able to explore those ideas during this process, but recognize that we also need more immediate solutions. So we're thinking about both.
Great, thanks, Aaron. Lauren, then Tara.
Thank you. I was hoping you could maybe provide a little bit more clarity around what you're thinking, what improved entrance means, and sort of what kinds of modes of or like who's being targeted with that effort.
So I can take a stab at that. Thank you for the question. I think this map, really just speaks to an array of possibilities when it comes to improved entrances. So one of our recommendations that I'll be presenting in terms of next steps is bringing on a planning and design consultant who can really help us strategize these actionable projects in the near term. Chris or Natalie or Kathleen, I don't know if you want to add to that.
That's you answered it very well, Regan. We have not contemplated that work yet, because prior to this conversation, our focus had been solely on the 14th Street lot. We're responding to the work of the TAP and envisioning different next steps that would explore how do we answer that question? What is an improved entrance, and how much would it cost, and where does that fit on our priority list of what's possible?
I can just mention as well that some of the past plans, that 1996 plan, the Broadway Corridor plan, have all sort of hinted at this need for some type of gateway to let you know that you're there, that you've arrived at the hill. So that's been a consistent recommendation in past plans as well.
Thank you.
Tara.
Yeah, similar to Lauren's question, the 13th Street corridor, what changes are you visualizing maybe on a more quick but in the weeds?
Thank you for the question. There have been a lot of internal discussions about how can we improve the 13th Street corridor and just make downtown easier to get to from the hill, and the hill easier to get to from downtown. And I know there have been a lot of conversations around exploring potential ideas, one of them being a potential cultural corridor study. Yeah, there have been discussions internally. Chris, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Well, I would just go back to what we heard from Natalie and Kathleen about these planning efforts that are already underway, where we do want to be answering those questions, where our ULI TAP identified this great potential along that corridor because it connects to so many great assets, cultural assets, places that people love to visit. And so our next step is to pursue this planning effort that will identify what's the low-hanging fruit, what are the things that we can do right away to support these investments that are coming out of the ground right now at the Hill Hotel and the Conference Center.
No other questions. I do have a question that kind of follows on that, Chris, and probably for Natalie. Natalie, I like the fact that you're looking at this as kind of two parts, so kind of a short-term approach and then a longer-term approach. Can you give us some general ideas on timing on this? I know that there's a lot of work being done on the Central Park and East Bookend area, and I know that all ties together. There may be a little bit of a sense of urgency around the hotels, which will be opening up here in a couple of years. Can you kind of maybe scope that for us, what your definition of short-term is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the piece where, and Kathleen's probably closer to the timeline of the work, but we've talked about with Allie and Brad and Chris kind of extensively that we really will want to be able to make improvements, especially, to the Arboretum, right? As the hotel opens up, we recognize that that's one of those just more urgent items that we want to be able to make improvements to that area to facilitate a more enjoyable connection from the new hotels to the downtown. So that's kind of when I think about the more immediate actions, it's centered around that. And then the more longer term is that kind of, I imagine, the more placemaking type work that Kathleen was referencing related to kind of the land use piece of it. And then also, long term, if 13th Street becomes like a cultural corridor that, we've seen examples from kind of across the US where we could kind of do something similar that really creates this like experience along 13th Street from the Hill to downtown. That would obviously be a longer term vision that we would work towards. So is that hopeful?
It is. Could someone remind us what the current estimated time of opening for each of the two hotels is?
I was going to see if Regan chimed in. So the Hill Hotel is due to open early next year, so 2024, I believe. And then the Conference Center, and please somebody correct me if I misspeak, is due later in 2025.
Great, thanks, Chris. We won't hold you to those exact dates. So Natalie, were those the type of timeframes you were thinking about, at least for some of the immediate and short-term plans, and like over the next maybe 2-ish to 3 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Any other questions on this one? Regan, I think we're ready for chapter 3.
Wonderful. We can go to the next slide. And then lastly, under these broad revitalization efforts, let's activate the district. We're partnering with the Hill Boulder Merchants Association on some upcoming events, but let's expand on that to plan other activations, leveraging and building on the Hill's creativity and energy to potentially revitalize positive nightlife and other events. Maybe even pulling from that alleyway enhancement plan that was conducted in 2018 to bring some of our alleyways to life. We can go on to the next slide. All right, now we're going to narrow in on our general improvement district owned asset, the 14th Street lot. And these recommendations will really take the form of two different directions, which will include maintaining UGID oversight and building a structure on that parcel of land. Or on the flip side, we could sell or lease the lot to a private developer. And so looking here on this slide, this suggests that we sell or lease the lot through a 100-year land lease to a private developer in which we, the city, would determine what could replace the existing surface lot. And some potential outcomes identified in the TAP with example photos on the left here include a boutique hotel, a social club, a food and community hub. There are really an array of options here. And ultimately, revenue from the sale of the lot could be used towards an endowment as a way of offering UGID that long-term funding, financial sustainability that we're looking for. Next slide. And then if we maintain oversight, there were 3 recommendations that the TAP outlined. One on the very left-hand side here is this maximum parking garage option, which suggests a 3-level parking garage providing approximately 150 additional parking spaces for the district. The other in the middle is parking with retail. This really presents an opportunity for a larger retail tenant, such as a grocery store, which we've heard is needed on the Hill. Suggesting approximately 13,000 square feet per floor of a 3-level structure for retail. And then lastly, on the right-hand side, this suggests a parking garage with retail and faculty housing. So this could be a great opportunity to partner with CU while addressing some of the retail and parking challenges that we've seen on the Hill. And I think this is our last pausing point. Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to pause for questions again.
Yeah, we thought that we might, because this is kind of a pretty dramatic proposal, we thought we might pause here one last time before we take it home and hear from you, Campsie, and ask questions of council. Are there any kind of questions that we haven't covered up to this point in time, including specifically relating to the 14th Street alternatives? Tara.
So I take it the faculty housing would be 100% affordable, or am I misunderstanding that?
So if you CU faculty housing, with the current ordinance, I would imagine yes. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong.
We haven't necessarily developed the exact funding or pricing strategy for it. It would be a partnership with the CU, so how they would determine affordable housing for the type of faculty that would want to live in the Hill space. I presume that we would probably qualify it as affordable, but we would leave that to our partnership with CU to determine pricing.
Thanks, Tara. Mark?
Is it possible in any way to quantify the nature of the shortage of parking on the Hill? I mean, nobody likes parking, but if we're going to try to attract new businesses on the Hill and people cannot get there, I mean, there will be people who will bike there and walk there, but there are people who are going to want to drive there. And if they can't get there, to what extent are we going to damage the economic viability of this rebranded district with better uses?
I'll go ahead and take that question. Thank you for it. I think it's really important to note that CU is building a 490 space parking garage as part of the conference center development. And so if we're able to get this right, that facility will only be about 4 blocks from the heart of the University Hill area. So if you think about downtown, where we've been so successful of building parking assets around the heart of our downtown, where people have gotten really used to parking in one place and then using their feet, bikes, or other modes of transportation to get to the destination. If we're able to get our partnership with CU dialed into a place where employees who are looking for access to their jobs, they might not be able to, they don't live in town, transit might not be a viable option for them, but they still need a place to store their vehicle. It's our hope that the partnership with CU and the use of that facility could translate into a different future for the access challenges that we're currently experiencing in the district, because we don't have that type of facility yet.
Has our agreement with CU been formalized?
We do have a formalized Grandview agreement that does touch on the availability of public parking at their conference center garage. There is probably more work that could be done to formalize it specifically for the University Hill commercial area uses. It does not get to that level of detail.
Would it not make some sense to engage in conversation with the university and formalize that understanding before we decide whether or not we can dispense with all or any portion of the parking on the 14th Street lot?
Yes. And I think that is exactly why our staff recommendation is to take a broader approach to the district's future and our design and planning. It's not just about building infrastructure in the right of way and painting murals. It's about formalizing these relationships with folks like CU, so that if we're able to create a different narrative for the folks who are trying to access this space now and the folks who are going to be accessing this space in the future, if parking doesn't have to be something that's driving our decision for 14th Street. Because even if we were to build 150 parking spaces in that space, on that lot tomorrow, that would probably not get us to a place where we've resolved access related issues on the Hill. And so we are in a time where perhaps we can work with our partners and shift the narrative that then can lead us to a space where we don't have to build any parking at this particular location because we've managed to resolve those challenges in another way.
Because if the conference center is sufficiently successful, there are going to be a lot of nights where we may not be able to access it at all, or only to a minimal extent. I have no idea what CU's perspective on this is going to be. But if we're going to rely upon their parking to be our parking, it would seem to me before we move too far ahead, we ought to know if their parking is going to be our parking.
We agree.
Okay. Was my question.
Thanks, Mark. Matt and Tara.
Thanks, Bob. I just don't like building more parking. So I would sort of get rid of that one phase, but we'll get there. But I like that we're working on a partnership. My question centers around activation, and sort of having been a part of recent activations that took 6 to 9 months, and they're a bit light with the civic area in West Pearl and 13th. I'm a little concerned because downtown Boulder took a lot of lead on trying to facilitate that. And I'm just worried about capacity and being able to have enough lead time from when the Hill Hotel arrives, is open, starts bringing people in, that we can really truly activate that space in a way that meets the moment. And so I'm sort of curious about, are there some resources we need to front load to get going? Is there some staffing? I'm just sort of wondering what we need to do in order to really move that forward so that we have the planning done and then plenty of time to implement. Because I think that's where we got squeezed for some of the downtown stuff, was just not enough time to implement. And we didn't quite have a partner, not their fault, but just didn't have the capacity to take all the things that we wanted to do on. So from those lessons, I'm just wondering, how have we learned and what's our ability to adapt so that we can knock this out of the park?
Thanks for that question. I would say, luckily in the meantime, we have a really great partner on the Hill, the Hill Boulder Merchants Association, that's been planning and executing some events on the Hill. And we're planning to continue to work with them in 2024. We have some funding dedicated from ARPA money for commercial area activations on the Hill, and we're planning on working closely with the Hill Boulder on that. In the longer term, I think, that's why we're having these discussions around exploring these different funding strategies for the Hill, from a downtown development authority to a potential bid, so that we can, have the funding resources and then staffing to put on these additional activations.
Oh, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. I know, I appreciate that response, but my concern is some of those funding strategies are going to require time to actually fill those coffers, and that's to some extent time we don't have for long-term, 100% agree, but for what's needed in that next 9 to 18 months, I think the city and the university are going to have to pump that resource in rapidly. And so I want to make sure that we knock it out of the park. And I'm, until maybe I see more, I'm sort of reserving whether or not I have confidence we're going to get there. I just want to know that we have a really solid plan and the people involved to do that, because I know how hard it is to set these things up. So I really hope that we can put the resources in place to get this done right.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Tara, and then back to Mark.
So the 14th Street lot redevelopment, didn't you want to push that back to see how it went with the hotel? So is this kind of like just how we're feeling at the time, or is there a reason why you want us to tell you how you feel about these three options now? I'm just curious.
Thanks for that question. So, and I'm going to get to this on the next slide, summarizing our recommendations and our next steps.
Okay.
We see redeveloping the 14th Street lot as a longer term strategy, ideally over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay.
So we do want to see what the impact from the new developments will be, and it'll give us time to kind of create this broader strategy that'll help inform the redevelopment of the 14th Street lot. At this point, we're really just outlining the array of possibilities.
Okay. So when you have grocery here, did you do research that, or did the consultants that there's a grocery needed? Because I'm thinking about the Whole Foods that was at Baseline that closed. So I'm not sure if these are just suggestions. Are they suggestions that people have thought about deeply and also studied and got metrics on, or what's your thoughts on that?
Studied and got metrics on, I would say no. Again, just kind of going back to that these are the array of possibilities. I mean, I've heard from various community members that a grocery store could be great on the hill, but again, it's something we would certainly analyze and study further before moving forward with something like that.
Thanks, Tara. Mark?
First, I apologize for taking another shot at this. A couple of years ago, we stood up the Hill Revitalization Working Group, which has members from the local community, businesses, CU students, and others as well. Have you been coordinating at all with them in terms of the kinds of recommendations you want to make, and should you not, if you have not?
So the Hill Revitalization Working Group, I believe a few years ago, I can't remember the exact date, but it kind of became focused on the residential community rather than the commercial district. Chris, do you know more about the history of that?
Well, it was stood up in the wake, I think, of the riots of a couple of years ago. And it has done a lot of work in terms of noise ordinances and trash ordinances. And so I think they have a fairly deep understanding of the challenges that occur in this district. And I'm just saying, you know, I would think it would be profitable to engage with them to see what their thoughts are on some of this.
So yeah, thanks for the question. We absolutely included members from the neighborhood, the Hill Revitalization Group that's focused on the neighborhood in our TAP stakeholder process as part of our public engagement work. If council supports this broader strategy development for district-wide improvements, as part of our engagement process, we would certainly include conversations with the neighborhood group, as well as UCAMC, which leads up the commercial side of the reinvestment strategy, and CU, both students and administration, among many others from community connectors. And what we're really seeking tonight is, prior to this evening, there had been a capital improvement project approved for 2025 for redevelopment of 14th Street lot, with planning dollars already allocated. And we're suggesting that instead of going down that track of just focusing on redevelopment of 14th Street, because we can only have so much capacity, that we first want to take a step back, have that engagement with the various stakeholders in the development of the district-wide broader strategies before we pick up the torch for the future of 14th Street.
Mark, could I colloquy on your point for a second?
Okay.
So Mark brought up something that I was also interested in, and he brought up that sort of the revitalization working group, and I appreciate Regan pointing out that it's been very homeowner focused revitalization and less so maybe business and economic revitalization. And I'm wondering if this is a time for us to maybe pivot their focus a bit so that when they do meet and as they continue, because we just did a package of a bunch of ordinances and a bunch of things from their recommendations, and maybe there's a sense of feeling idle since we have tackled that stuff, and maybe giving a new cause to say, no, we would love to engage, but we want to pivot you towards economic vitality and what this revitalization and activation look like. So I'm wondering if that's something that we would institute, or we would sort of set forth for them, or what have you. But I think overall, all of those engaged on the Hill, we might want to pivot them so that we're kind of more uniformly focused on economic vitality and business revitalization.
Matt, if I can colloquy back, I think they're still working on some ordinance changes, but other than that, I think the pivot might make a lot of sense.
Can I colloquy too?
Yes.
Just I agree with Mark's point that I think there is still work to be done on the residential side, but also it kind of predates my time, but I think that the origins of, and the name kind of spells it out, but the origins of that work group were more focused on the economic vitality side. So I don't want it to be seen that this group has not already done that. I think that was sort of tackled first, and then we got into residential, and we're now seeing some of the fruits of the labor of that first part with these Hill hotels coming online. Like that was an outgrowth, I think, of the early work they did. So not trying to squash any community participation, but just wanted to give that history as I think it exists. I saw Bob nodding, so maybe he'd like to colloquy too, because he might have been on council then.
Well, it looks like Nuri has the answer.
Well, I don't know if I have the answer to the past, but I just wanted to confirm that they are indeed continuing to work. We are working closely with them on a chronic nuisance ordinance and have a couple things down the pike. So just wanted to share that is in fact their continued focus.
And Rachel, you are right, and Aaron can confirm this. The group was originally formed to focus on commercial redevelopment, and particularly around the conference center on the Hill. I think they pivoted to commercial, and I think what we're suggesting is that they may want to pivot back to the commercial side of things once they finish their work on the residential side. Is that right, Aaron? Silence is assent. Anything else from anybody else on this? Okay. Well, sticking with Chris's baseball analogy, I think, Regan, we're about the 8th inning of the opener. So why don't you bring us on home for the first game?
Bring you all home. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so in summary, staff recommends that prioritizing broader strategies in the near term would benefit the district, and that it will enhance district vitality. It'll generate that positive economic growth that we're looking for, while also providing UGID with an opportunity to again adapt to these many upcoming changes with the new developments. Additionally, it gives us time to focus on creating this broader district-wide strategy that I mentioned earlier will help inform a reinvestment strategy for the 14th Street lot. So again, kind of looking at that work as a longer term effort over the next 3 to 5 years. Next slide. The University Hill Commercial Area Management Commission is, of course, the advisory board for UGID. We have Cheryl Lagori on the call if anyone has any questions about the feedback that I'm going to share. But they've been very closely involved in all the work we've been doing on the Hill, including the revitalization strategies that we're exploring. And they've shared some really valuable feedback that is important to consider. So next slide. UCAMC emphasized how the Hill is a very special place in Boulder, first and foremost. It has a lot of positive characteristics despite these existing challenges that we're seeing. So let's leverage what makes it so special and unique and not forget about the Hill's history and potential. There's a desire to better integrate the residential neighborhood with the commercial district, with the CU student population. So let's create that zipper rather than a divide. The Hill needs local champions. It needs strong voices that are advocating and committed to the success of the neighborhood. Again, back to this idea of identifying the Hill brand. It doesn't need to be rebranded, but let's leverage its unique and eclectic nature to enhance that identity that can then be promoted to the city at large. And then lastly, parking is a continuous challenge, but necessary. If we want to move forward with these broader strategies, including more activations, we're going to have to navigate and figure out how to accommodate the influx of people given the limited public parking on the Hill. Next slide. We can go right into the next. So next steps that staff's identified, community vitality will facilitate coordination among other city departments, planning and development services, transportation and mobility, housing and human services, and more. Successful revitalization on the Hill requires cross-departmental involvement. So an immediate next step will include collaborating with other city staff to assess the roles and responsibilities. We'd like to develop an RFP to secure planning and design consultant services to help staff identify feasible and actionable projects that can be executed in the near term. So projects that align with these broader goals of enhancing the identity, connecting and activating the district, and ideally could be implemented over the next 1 to 3 years. And then lastly, any revitalization efforts will, of course, require input from the broader community and stakeholders. So we'd work with our communication and engagement department to help us with outreach and soliciting community feedback, including engaging with our community connectors and residents, CU, the Youth Opportunities Advisory Board, and more. We'll also plan to check in regularly with UCAMC, Council, other boards and commissions to ensure that we receive feedback and direction and ensure progress on these efforts. Next slide. All right, we can go to the last slide, which is just circling back on those questions for council. Does council support staff's recommendation to prioritize the development of these broad strategies in advance of exploring site-specific redevelopment options for the 14th Street lot? Does council wish to direct staff to explore code changes in upcoming annual work plans that are specific and unique to the Hill? And then does council have any questions about proposed next steps?
Let's just call on people and ask them to answer all the questions in one statement. Mark, is your hand up to start us off? You're on mute, Mark.
Actually, that's an accident, but I'll take advantage of it.
Okay.
I am very supportive of doing all of these things. But the only thing that troubles me is there's an implication in the staff memo that we might be considering going back to 2 o'clock operating hours for restaurants on the Hill. And I just want to remind people that there was good and sufficient reason that those limitations were put into place. And I'm hard pressed to see how that will be an improvement. I understand the challenge it creates for the restaurants, but I am hard pressed to see how that will be an improvement for the hotel, for non-restaurant businesses, or for residents. So I would want to be very, very careful about that. And one last comment was with respect to the 50-50 sales of food versus liquor. Having done probably more than 100 commercial restaurant leases in my day, that's really not that unusual a covenant to enter into. Most landlords want to ensure that their tenants are operating, a higher end kind of establishment than you get with somebody who's generating 60-70% of their gross receipts from liquor. So we can do with that what we will, but let's not feel that that's anything very, very unusual, because it really is not in the world of commercial restaurant leases. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Nicole, then Lauren.
Thank you. Yes and yes for me. I think it's a really good idea to do some engagement before moving forward in some different directions here. One of the things that I'm kind of excited about is the opportunity to think about how we could use a space like the 14th Street lot and just the Hill in general to really build more connections between the people who are living on the Hill, between the folks who are non-CU affiliated and the people who are CU affiliated. So this seems like a really nice opportunity to think about how we can design the space in a way that will bring people together. To the point that my colleague just brought up about changing the hours for restaurants, I am actually less concerned about that. And I sort of wonder whether we might have better luck with creating a better residential environment if we more concentrated people, so they weren't necessarily in their homes drinking and outside and things like that, but were rather in spaces not only where it was more appropriate to kind of be gathering socially at later hours of the day, but also in places where there's somebody monitoring alcohol consumption. So that to me seemed like a good thing. Also, I think for conferences, one of the, just with my CU hat on for a moment, one of the things that some of the folks that are really excited about on the research side of campus is having a place for these larger scientific conferences and having some hours that go later. It's really the time when people all around the world can gather. And sometimes those meetings do go really late as you're planning the next grant or something like that. So anyway, just wanted to add that as well. Thank you. But thanks for all this work. I'm excited about where this is headed.
Thanks, Nicole. Lauren, then Matt.
Thank you. I agree with Nicole on yes and yes. I have some caveats or concerns. I think, or things that I'd like to see. One of the first things around transit and parking is I'd like to see a branded sort of transit bus connection to, off-site parking, or something around like trying to brand some of the parking options for people, just so that that's clearer for how people might get to and from that area. It might, as it was mentioned in the packet, it's already a very highly served area with buses. So it might just be making some of those connections more explicit for people. In terms of district identity, and I think this speaks a little bit to, some of the high level of regulation in this area, I really would like to see us open up and allow for more creativity in this area to kind of, it feels like the businesses aren't totally allowed to bring forth a strong identity right now. I mean, there's a lot of things that play into that, but looking at relaxing some rules so that the identity piece can really be from the businesses forward, as opposed to like trying to come up with a branding idea that we're like sort of pasting around. And then with the connection piece and the entrances, for me, I see connecting 13th Street with downtown. I'm really excited about kind of looking at an Arboretum update and that piece of it. I'm not so excited about trying to do signal changes at those entrance intersections or things like that. To me, the heart of the district is really away from Broadway a little bit. And I think that that's okay. I think that once that gets energized, people will be drawn there without a big sign that is like, this is the entrance to the Hill. And then with the activation, I think that, from on the business side, you hear this in resort communities all the time, and because they rely so much on students for the businesses in that area, I think they have a similar issue, right, with their kind of downturn during the summer. And so for me, the activation piece during the summer is probably the most important, to make sure that we're drawing people up to that area when students aren't there, because it's delightful to hang out on the hill in the summer. And I think we just need to remind people of that. I know that in our future item, we're going to talk a lot about, or a little bit maybe about, food carts and food trucks, or that was in the packet at least. And I wonder if there's a place for those kinds of things on the hill as well, just to kind of help bring that street level activation up. Thanks. That's all I got.
Thank you, Lauren. Matt and Tara.
Thanks, Bob. And yeah, I'll just finish off by saying, Regan, you made it through the 9-inning game well, so thank you so much. And we can just stay on the baseball analogies all night on that one. I want to start with perhaps maybe what the lowest hanging fruit is here, and it maybe counters a little bit with my colleague Mark. There's some basic psychology to this with regards to the liquor and the ebb and flow and noise and sound and trash, and what we've been playing more or less whack-a-mole with, which is no matter which generation of students come in, they're going to want to have fun. They're going to want to express themselves and having fun. And when I was a student, we partied on the hill. We went to the rack, went to Teresa's, we went to the sink. Like, there was places you could go to have fun. And then when the night was over, if it was at 2 a.m., you went home on the hill. We shut that down with BRC 965B. And where'd they go? They went to their homes to party. And now what are we doing? We're playing whack-a-mole. We're trying to increase ordinances, daytime nuisance, have more enforcement, because of course they got shut down from the hill and they spilled out back westward on the hill. So I think that makes total sense from a psychological perspective. We can enforce all we want, or we can just provide younger folks a place to be. And that commercial area of the hill makes perfect sense. It worked when I was a student. There's no reason why it won't work for future generations of students and those that want to enjoy that. So to me, the lowest hanging fruit is just to simply rescind BRC 9-6-5-B, because at the end of the day, this is also an equity issue. Why would we treat these businesses any different than the businesses in the rest of our community? We've deliberately handicapped any business that currently exists or wants to exist on the hill. I mean, that's unconscionable when we think about wanting to boost economic vitality, especially on the backside of COVID, and even double, especially if it's even a phrase, because restaurants and hospitality have been impacted the most and have the longest road to recovery. So to me, I think there's just like a very simple thing we can do here: scratch the thing that shouldn't have ever been placed to begin with and bring back equity and let businesses have a chance to thrive. To me, that's just simple, easy, good governance for us to do. And I'd love to see us pursue that. With regards to activations, so I like number 1, I like number 2. That point on the liquor law, I think, is something we need to do really quick. It doesn't need engagement. Like, we can just do this and lead and get that show on the road. As I said, my piece on activation, so I hope we put the resources in to get that done right. I'd like to see also streamline the events, that event street. It's the only one we have in the city, and it needs to be turnkey. It should be like a wedding venue, where you say, hey, I want to use that event street for 100 people. And it's like, boom, boom, boom. Here are the specific things. I want to do 150, boom, boom, boom. Treat it like a wedding venue. Make it as simple as possible for anybody to activate that space. And then lastly, I agree with Nicole. Conference season, when I was working at the university, we had the #1 funded NASA funded public university in the country. We couldn't host any NASA conferences here at CU. And it's because we didn't have the space for it. Now with that, we will. And those were all summer-based conferences. So the ebb and flow, I think, will be really well, that the summer's low for most of the businesses on the hill. That's what hurts them. We bring conferences in, that rising tide floats their boat. So the seasonality of those conferences, I think, will be a great, great addition. But I don't think it'll have too many impacts on parking, because we already don't have the students. So when summer conferencing comes up, that parking need is diminished from that need. So I think we'll be in pretty good shape there. But otherwise, great job, Regan. Chris, you got yourself a good staff, and that's it for me. Appreciate it.
Matt, you're so shy and ambiguous. I'm not exactly sure what you just said. Thank you for your passion, Matt. Tara, you're up.
Matt, I'm so glad I go after you, because I'm equally as passionate. I have to ask myself, are we trying to make the hill businesses suffer on purpose? Why are we making it so impossible for them to succeed? First, we have the 50%, which is nowhere else in the city. Is that right, Regan? Nobody else has that 50%?
Correct.
Then they have to close early. It's almost like we're saying, I don't know why the Hill is not a great place anymore, but we gave you all these rules, but why isn't it a great place? Well, that's one of the reasons why it deteriorated. So for me, they said they want a partner, and I say, I don't know about you all, but I definitely want to be a partner. I want to make the Hill successful. Again, I believe that the success as far as the branding goes, so yes, get rid of those. I think as a council, we've always wanted to get rid of as many obstacles as possible for stopping businesses from succeeding. And so I hope that we can do that tonight as well. As far as branding, I would say it's the chicken and the egg situation, where if we take away the obstacles and the rules that are making it so difficult, I'm hoping that the Hill will make its own brand, fun or funky. One thing we don't want to do is like fake branding, right? Where we have a cute sign, and Lauren, you and I discussed it at a meeting, and we say, oh, the Hill is so cute, but it isn't cute right now. I mean, it just isn't. So having a sign telling people to go to the Hill right now, why don't we release it to be everything it can and then see how it turns out, and then we brand it according to how it became. Hopefully fun and funky, because we don't have that right now. Let's see. I said that. Do I have anything else? I did want to say that I was particularly thrilled that CU supported the Hill with that financially by helping with the ambassadors. And I think that's going to be a big help. I didn't get to actually ask, did that program start already? And if it did, has it been successful? Has it helped at all?
It did start, and it's been very successful so far. We actually just had a meeting on the Hill recently with the Merchants Association and local business owners and the ambassadors themselves. It was sort of meet and greet, which went fantastic. And I know that community members are really thrilled about it.
Oh, good. And I think I'll end with, I've said this before, this is our opportunity of a lifetime. We really only have a year to make this place great. People can go, they can go towards downtown or they can go towards the Hill. Right now, they're going to go downtown. And so for me, I want to commit to doing as much as we can as a body to help them to go towards the Hill Commercial District. That's all I have to say.
Chris, did you want to chime in?
Well, I just wanted to acknowledge it, and I know you mentioned this, Regan, that Cheryl Liguori, the chair of UCAMC and the CEO of Z2 Entertainment, the owners of the Fox and the Boulder Theater, she's on the call. I just wanted to remind council members, if you do have any questions related to your comments for her, if you'd like to provide that opportunity.
Oops, I forgot to say one thing. I don't know about 2 o'clock, but I know whatever it is now is not good. So if we could reach a compromise so that the neighborhood is like fine and the businesses can thrive, I think that would be a good thing.
Thanks, Tara. And why don't we take a pause before we get to Rachel, Aaron, and Junie, and Cheryl, you've been listening to a lot of this, and I know that UCAMC and your group just went through quite a bit of this work. Any reactions or any comments you want to share with us, Cheryl? And you might,
thanks for the opportunity, because I'm actually at a fundraiser at the moment and will need to jump off this call. So I would love to answer any questions. I think first of all, I'd like to thank the city for a couple of things. And I think the biggest game changer for us is the ability to have the hotel. And that started when City Council allowed the Hill University District to be carved out of the height restriction. And that was almost 10 years ago. That predates the University Hill working group. So the University Hotel would never have been able to be built if City Council didn't assist with that. And also the generous general fund transfers to keep the district alive. We know that's a heavy lift. And for many, many years in studies, we have talked about ways to make the district sustainable. And we will continue that conversation. I want to talk briefly about my experiences on the Hill, I would like to say that most of the raucous rioting, untoward behavior that the city attaches to the University Hill Commercial District really does start and end in the residential section. So I think the district itself has been kind of unfairly punished for what happens in the residential area. Even the riot that people love to talk about, it started in the residential section, and then moved toward the Hill. It didn't start in the commercial district. I can tell you, for several people who are at this fundraiser, and Pete Turner, who owns Illegal Pete's, I've personally asked, why won't you come to the Hill? We had many intercept studies and many conversations with residents. What would you like to see on the Hill that would draw you as a resident, not just a student resident, but as a resident of the Hill? And they've all talked about a better sit-down restaurant, a microbrew, and all three of them had said, why would I go to the Hill when nowhere else in the state do you have to have 50% of your sales in food? And if you talk to any finer dining places, it isn't maybe a lease issue, but it's an operational issue that that's a hard pill to swallow. It's not a result of people wanting to just pour alcohol down our students. And the idea of having supervision is a great idea. I think, Mark from the Sink, they chose to close early. I think Illegal Pete's and the Fox Theater are probably the only people who operate till, or can, not always, but have the ability to operate until 2 a.m. So I will say that regulatory barrier is very unfair, and it has definitely stopped. I called Peter from Illegal Pete, who was going to go into potentially the Albums on the Hill space to expand and maybe have a small music venue and make it, make the Hill a little more active. There used to be 3 or 4 music venues on the Hill. And he specifically said, no, I'm not going to stop at 11. I'm not going to have to worry about my percentage of food to alcohol. So it is truly, Dave Query said, why would I go up there? Kevin Daly from the Mountain Sun Group said, why would I go up there? It is truly, it has an impact. And I think if we were to have businesses like that, whether they stayed open till 2 or 1 or midnight, as you see a lot of downtown businesses close, it could really be a wonderful thing to draw some of the families down to the Hill and feed the students as well, something other than sandwiches and pizzas and things like that. So I do think that's really important. And thank you to Matt and Tara and Nicole for kind of understanding that the creativity is not all tied to alcohol service, and that it does allow businesses to explore their greater potential there. I think we are connected already. We see one of the first things on UCAMC was lighting and safety for me, and we did get lighting in the student walking corridors. The students abandoned the Hill when the additional restrictions and businesses started to close. And so they just moved down to, as I don't know how many of you go out late at night in the West Pearl district, but they've just abandoned the Hill and they've moved downtown. And anybody who goes out at night on a Thursday in downtown Boulder probably knows that. So I do think that we are very thankful for the work that's been done. I think UCAMC has asked for parking forever because the perception is that it's difficult to park on the hill. We are a 600, 700 capacity venue. Putting my business manager hat on, and it is challenging for my employees to get home after work, for patrons to park and drive around. So I do think parking is a real challenge. I love the idea of a grocery store when you have alfalfa's gone and you have Whole Foods gone, a place for students and residents to be able to walk down and grab some lettuce and chicken for their dinner would be a lovely thing. The university does not contribute to the financial pot, so to speak. So I think another business would be great. But we do have challenges, and those of us on UCAMC and the business owners, the Hill Boulder has one part-time employee and 3 businesses that participate. So the idea of the Merchants Association is not a true merchant association. It's one part-time employee we're funded by the city for that, and it's the same 4 businesses that participate and do everything on the Hill. So we'd love to see bigger businesses. So when I hear activate, I'm like, who's going to activate? The same 4 businesses are tired of doing the heavy lifting for the past 20 years. So that makes me a little nervous, but I do think activation, once we have a better Hill feel, and it feels safe and it feels clean, I think activation would be great. So those are my thoughts, and I will say thank you for the work that we've done. I think I'd love to see greater consideration for some of the true challenges, one of them being the regulatory barrier. And then we know we have to get off the generosity of the general fund. And I think property owners are a challenge on the Hill. When you look at 14% occupancy over such a small district, that's a big percentage for such a small number. So we really want new businesses, and it's hard for us to attract them.
Thank you, Cheryl, and we'll let you get back to your fundraiser. But thanks for sharing the view of UCAMC.
Well, I'm available if anybody has just a few questions for a few more minutes, or I can step off now.
Feel free to stay on, because I think we're finishing up our comments, and we'll see if any of our final commenters have questions for you. So Rachel and then Aaron.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Cheryl. I don't have any questions. I super appreciated and agreed with your perspectives. And I line up pretty well with what most others have said, except, no offense, Wallach. I did not line up with you tonight on this. I wanted to appreciate Cheryl's mention of Albums on the Hill. I think many of us missed that store, so thanks for mentioning them tonight. My dog is breathing right into this. Of course, I'm gonna walk around and see if I can get the dog to stop barking. The code limitations on liquor licenses on the Hill never made a lick of sense to me. So I would actually fast track that one. I'm not sure if I missed some sort of an exemption mentioned, but I cannot imagine how a hotel could maintain a bar without being able to, serve after 10 p.m. or I don't know what everybody else does in hotels, but usually my interface with hotel food is after 10 and is probably a little bit heavier on the drinking. So that's hard. I just don't understand how that could work. On the Hill Working Group, which I was a part of for a few years, I often repeated one of my mantras of like, well, if we're telling people no here, we need to have a yes somewhere else. So I think we've worked hard on saying we really don't want students to create a lot of noise in the residential neighborhoods. And there's a couple ways that I think we can get at that. One is I think having establishments that they can go to where it is a yes later at night, because I do think students are gonna, people that age are gonna do what they're gonna do. And also, as a mom of CU students, especially right now with the fentanyl overdose epidemic and such, I would really prefer that our kids are using substances honestly in front of trained staff than like in basements. I don't know as much about the building and affordable housing restrictions on the Hill, so I'm not suggesting that be fast tracked. Wanted to note that at a conference I was in Barcelona, this ties back to, I can't remember who was talking earlier about sort of getting people to want to visit the Hill if you have a choice. I think maybe it was Tara. They were sending texts like in real time. They were seeing like where they needed kind of crowd control and to maybe incentivize people to move from one part of the city to another with coupons or like discounts or things. So just lift that up as maybe something we could do to incentivize people going to multiple different kind of tourist spots on busy days in our city, especially, but also maybe just if there is an area that's within Community Vitality's umbrella, maybe that's something you could look at what Barcelona's doing. I think we obviously need some, the transportation links aspect is going to need a lot of future engagement and discussion and tab check-ins and things like that. And it's just going to be a little bit of a Debbie Downer and point out a couple terms that were used tonight that were either confusing or I think maybe are not terms that we're using anymore. So one is grandfathering. I think the term that we're using now is legacy rather than grandfather, just societally. And then activation, I think that gets used a few ways by the city. As an example, I've heard it in city presentations as a sort of a term of art of making a place less inviting for homeless folks. I've also heard it as a place where you are really encouraging pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. So and one person that I talked to today was actually confused by what we meant by that. So I would say maybe there's a better word that we could use in the next presentation than activation. I think you mean it in the second way in this presentation, but I'm not 100%, but I think that's what it is. And so maybe just be a little crisper, but I think it's great stuff. Regan, welcome to the city a year late. Thanks for that awesome presentation and introduction. And I'm a yes and a yes on the two questions. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rach. So we'll have Aaron, Junie, second helping for Tara, and then I'll wrap us up so we can move on to the second presentation. Aaron?
Great. Well, I'll be pretty quick because people have generally expressed my thoughts already. So Regan and team, you all are doing a phenomenal job. I think your suite of recommendations are absolutely on target. So I'm definitely supportive on yes and yes on 1 and 2. And just a +1 to my colleagues who've mentioned about the alcohol service on the Hill, that in a regular serving alcohol to people over the age, but younger folks in a well-regulated environment is preferable to these house parties that have been getting out of hand. So I think that's a good step to take going forward, and as well as the 50-50 rule. So I think equalizing these rules out with the rest of the city makes sense. And I think that can be productive for the Hill and the overall residential area going forward. So really like the direction you're going, and thanks for a great job.
Thanks, Aaron. Junie, you're up.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation as well. It was very thorough. My answer to 1 and 2 is yes and yes. I appreciate the comments, or at least the part of the presentation when you talked about community stakeholder engagement. I think that's very important as part of this project. CU businesses on the Hill and integrating the residential community to the commercial district. I think that's very important. As I've seen on council for the past 3.5, 4 years, there's seems to be some kind of tension between the residents there, the students, and also the businesses. I think ensuring that that relationship is very strong is very helpful to the work that we do. Yes, on the broad revitalization by staff. And I just wanted to add, I remember when I first ran for council back 4 years ago, I remember community members and many businesses on the Hill has been asking for the activation of the streets and alleyways and planning for more events. I know that Rachel mentioned, hey, let's change the word. But aside from that, community members have been asking for this. So I think it's about time. It's been a very, very long time. Community members have been asking for those type of changes. It would be helpful. We have a pretty big university that's right there, and we have all these students. So I think finding ways to get the kids involved as well, it's very important because, sometimes when I think of the noise issues on the Hill, I really do think a lot of these young people are bored, not to make excuses for them, but I'm saying if we have more opportunities to engage them, more things for them to do right there on the Hill, I think they might be less there. We might, right? Because I don't know the cause of why there's so much noise, aside from the fact that young people make noise. But I think keeping them busy through other activities in the community might be helpful. Yeah, I think you're doing a great work. Keep up the great work. And I do believe that the Hill could be self-sustaining and draw community and businesses, but we have to put in the work. And that work really is through the activation that community has been asking for the past 4 years. So keep up the great work, and thank you for the presentation.
Thanks, Junie. Tara, did you have a follow-up comment?
It's actually a question, but first, Junie, thank you. That was a great comment. I loved it. Yes, 2 things. First of all, Boss Lady Pizza, I miss you so much. That's first of all. Secondly, I just have a question, not really a double dip, possibly a double dip, but not really. My question is to Cheryl. Was that her? Yes, Cheryl. Do you think parking wise, I know it's a problem with your employees, and that makes me sad. So will you be able to last until the Hill Hotel parking goes up, or is there any way to give some immediate help to that situation, Chris? Is there something we can do in just the next year to help those employees find a place to park?
They park in the neighborhood. Our patrons and our employees park in the neighborhood. I always park in what I still refer to the Jones Street parking lot, which is the 14th Street lot. Many of our patrons don't know it's there, so that's a great thing. But for the most part, patrons and staff just circle around the neighborhood looking for parking, and that is easier in the summer, and during our very busy season in the fall and the spring, it's much more difficult, and they have to walk much further late at night to get to their cars.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks, Cheryl.
I feel like I want to respond as well in appreciation of Cheryl's experience and her employees' experience and Tara's question. There are a lot of dynamics related to the parking challenge on the Hill, including the fact that we don't have regulated parking outside of the commercial district. So there are free parking conditions on the residential streets directly adjacent. So that does lend itself to folks searching for free parking. There is an element, of course, that we sold off the Pleasant Street lot that reduced the amount of paid parking available in the district for folks who are attending a concert or getting to the Hill for other purposes. We do have already established arrangements with CU when it comes to some permit parking in the Grandview area already, even without the new structure. We continue to also be concerned and wanting to provide good service to the businesses in the district. And we have the 14th Street lot right now. It is paid short-term parking only. We do not issue permits for that lot. There is possibility that we could explore some permit-based parking for certain times for that space, because there are times of the day and times of the year that it is very underutilized. But I just wanted to mention that there are possibilities we could explore. I don't have a good solution for you right this moment, but we know that these are challenges, and we want to work with the businesses to navigate a positive track forward so that parking isn't the thing that prevents success in the long term.
Thanks for those observations, Chris. Let me try to, at the risk of getting it wrong, let me try to summarize what I think I heard from my colleagues. And first of all, I agree with pretty much everything that was said. So I'm not going to repeat what's been said. I heard some comments around exploring financial district options to ensure the sustainability of the district, and that could be any number of things from expanding the boundaries of UGID to perhaps creating a DDA to maybe creating a bid. I know that staff is looking at all those things, and it sounds like there was enthusiasm to continue that work. It sounds like people were supportive of the staff's recommendation to wait on any significant changes around the 14th Street parking lot until we see how things shake out here, and particularly with the 490 spots coming up available on the university's property, and maybe a direction to staff to firm that up a little bit more as that parking lot gets finished. I heard some enthusiasm directed to Natalie to keep going on the short-term transportation solutions with the goal of having some temporary or short-term solutions in place in time for the hotel openings. I heard a few people comment that once the Hill Revitalization Working Group finishes its work on the residential side, that they return to the original work and be a engagement tool for staff when it comes to strategy on Hill Revitalization, which is how they got started several years ago. And I heard a pretty significant majority of folks wanting to explore code changes. Anything, folks, that I missed? Was that a good recap? Chris, you have your hand up.
I just, well, if folks have anything else to add, please. But I also wanted to thank you all for the great feedback on all this work. I heard the word fast track from many folks. I would love, if you don't mind, could we maybe just get a thumbs up on if we want to attach the word fast track to question 2?
Full straw poll there. Maybe some hands.
Is this regard to code changes in general or specific ones that we've discussed?
Specific to the liquor rules and the 50-50 food.
Yep.
I'm just counting.
Seen some.
Yeah, I think we certainly heard that, Chris, and I think we'll go back and talk to CAO and with our planning and development services director, but we certainly get that there is great appreciation and support to move that forward. And we will perhaps come back to you and let you know timing or what that will take.
Very good.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. Just to be clear, by fast track, we're not talking about circumventing public processes here, right? Just to move forward with those on a relatively quick basis, but would still include some outreach and public hearing and all our typical stuff.
We presume engagement is involved, which is why we want to go back and talk about that. And we also want to make sure that that fits within the work plan. Certainly PNDS and City Attorney's Office is doing, but we are happy to get back to you on that. But we hear a majority wanting to move in that direction. And so appreciate that. I think the direction here has been really crisp.
Great. I just want to thank Cheryl as well. Cheryl, your input was very helpful. I appreciate it. Thanks for your service on the board.
Yeah, and thanks to the other staff members, Kathleen and Natalie, who were here. Regan, let me test what Nuria just said. Did you get what you needed?
I certainly did. Yes, really appreciate the feedback and direction. Very clear.
We are finished with game 1 of the doubleheader. Regan, you don't get to go anywhere because you're pitching the second game. So
are you all sick of me yet?
We're not sick of you. We're loving you, and so just give us some more of that. On the second presentation by Regan, it's relatively short and it's pretty streamlined. And so our suggestion is maybe we hold our questions to the very end if you guys can. And we're a little behind schedule now, but I think this is going to go pretty quick. We do have a guest speaker who's going to help Regan with this, who she'll introduce here in a few minutes. But let's let Regan and her guest get through this all, and then we'll have our questions at the end, and then she'll have some questions for us. Regan, it's back to you.
Great.
And maybe while the slides are coming up, just to intro this a little bit, we're so delighted to have been able to continue this conversation. It's been part of conversations in Boulder around development for many, many years now, as far as the need for affordable commercial and some efforts over the years to accommodate that in certain instances. We're so delighted to have been able to work with the CU Real Estate Center and in exploring ways to take the work that's been done over the years to the next level. And so Regan has worked really closely with the CU Real Estate team and a number of grad students who have helped with this work over the past 12 months. And now we're just looking forward to daylighting all this great work with you all and seeing about steps forward. So over to you, Regan.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, just to reiterate, we're really excited about this work. And in summary, this presentation will outline the context around the cost of doing business in Boulder, as well as our recommendation to develop an affordable commercial pilot program. We can go to the next slide. So quickly, the agenda here, we'll start with those questions for council that were in the memo, dive into a background, the analysis that informed our recommendations. I will outline some next steps, and then we will circle back on those questions for discussion. So we have two key questions for council this evening. One, does council support our recommendation to explore the development of an affordable commercial pilot program? And two, does council have any questions about next steps? All right, diving into the background here, we can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start by outlining some high-level context and some of the issues that we're seeing today. Boulder is home to more than 7,500 businesses, the majority of them, 96%, being small businesses, which is defined by fewer than 50 employees. And our community relies really heavily on them. They provide jobs for local residents, provide critical goods and services, and generate sales taxes to help fund city services. However, businesses face an array of pressures related to operating costs and leases, with particular emphasis on this triple net lease arrangement, which most of the city's small businesses are tied to as a tenant in commercial space. Triple net lease arrangements pass through property operating expenses, property taxes, and insurance onto the tenants. So this is an additional cost on top of the base rent and is an important consideration when thinking about the cost of doing business in Boulder. And I'll dive more into the factors that impact these costs later in the presentation. COVID-19 exacerbated a lot of these challenges, from the temporary closures that businesses face to social distancing requirements, staffing shortages. The pandemic again exacerbated many existing challenges, creating even tighter profit margins. And the effects of the pandemic are ongoing. So while some businesses have largely recovered, others continue to lag, especially that small business community. And then lastly, it's important to note that this is not a new topic of conversation. The idea of affordable commercial has been called out in existing city plans, prior council meetings, and a subject to explore further on city staff work plans. The Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan calls out the rising cost of commercial space, as well as the citywide retail study and other city plans. And I'll reference some of the language from these studies during the presentation. We can go on to the next slide. All right, now that I've provided some brief high-level context, let me expand on what the city is doing currently to help offset some of these costs. Starting with the first bullet there, for over 50 years, the city has leased commercial space to small businesses, nonprofits, arts organizations at below market rates. And this is managed by the Community Vitality Department, Facilities and Fleet, and Parks and Recreation. In downtown Boulder alone, Community Vitality manages 12 commercial spaces owned by the Central Area General Improvement District, also known as CAGID, including commercial spaces on the ground floors of our district-owned parking structures. So one of those retail spaces you can see here on the right-hand side of this slide at 1500 Pearl, Colorado Glassworks, is a woman-owned small business that recently leased the space last year. We issue a limited number of mobile vending cart permits each year to enhance the vitality and the visual appeal of the Pearl Street Mall. And these permits are issued for both retail and fast casual dining options, and they're targeted at that entrepreneurial small business startup community. The Community Culture, Resilience, and Safety CCRS tax was approved for a 15-year extension in 2021. It specifies that 10% of CCRS tax revenues are dedicated to support nonprofits, with emphasizing tackling the space affordability challenge. 30 Pearl, which is now called Boulder Commons. So to help address the high cost of leasing commercial space, the city included a below market commercial pilot in one quadrant of the 30 Pearl project being developed in partnership with Boulder Housing Partners. And so the covenant requires that half of the commercial space, or approximately 9,300 square feet, will be leased at below market rate rents as a pilot administered by the city's Community Vitality Department. And a similar covenant has been developed for the Macy's redevelopment site at 1900 28th Street within the 29th Street Mall, which will require no less than 7,500 square feet of commercial space to be charged at below market rate rent. And then lastly, and most recently, beginning in fall of 2022, we engaged with the CU Real Estate Center and a group of graduate MBA students with the aim of having them research and conduct stakeholder interviews to identify strategies that enhance the availability and affordability of commercial space in Boulder. And so I have a slide later dedicated to their research and findings, which will be shared here shortly. And I'm excited to pass it off to Charles Biddle Porter at that point, who was on this call and he was part of the student research team. We can go to the next slide. And I'd like to just take a moment to talk about the Community Benefit Project, which is an important initiative that's been the topic of discussion in council in prior years. So Boulder's Community Benefit Project is a tool to ensure that new growth and development contribute positively to the community. It requires that developers provide permanently affordable housing when adding additional floor area to a building, up to that city's building height limit of 55 feet. In June 2021, city staff proposed to amend the land use code to implement Community Benefit Phase 2. This would have added below market rate non-residential uses as options for developers requesting additional height or floor areas, as opposed to strictly affordable housing. But the ordinance was not passed, and council advised staff to focus on funding for affordable commercial, as well as simpler ways to achieve the community benefit of below market rate space. And so since then, discussions have continued about the potential for finding other ways to fund programs for affordable commercial, including using a similar construct to how the city funds permanently affordable housing. Nothing has been brought to council since, but it's something the city, particularly Planning and Development Services, has explored and discussed. Next slide. All right, let's dive into the analysis that staff has considered as part of the development of an affordable commercial pilot program. We can go to the next slide. So I want to start by going over some key factors that contribute to the cost of doing business in Boulder. City policies related to the built environment help shape the form, protect historic and environmental resources, and preserve neighborhood character, and ultimately contribute greatly to the availability and the cost of commercial space. Other key factors outlined here on this slide include the demand for commercial space, property values, property taxes assessed on commercial properties, the resources such as cost and time required to develop or redevelop commercial properties, and then lastly, the costs associated with building materials. So it's important to make note of the built environment, the policies, and the factors that contribute to why the cost of doing business in Boulder is so high, including those triple net lease costs. And next I'll go over some key points from Newmark Group's Denver office, which is a commercial real estate services firm. So we can go on to the next slide. So the graphs you see on this slide speak to the total square footage of commercial space in Boulder. This includes office, industrial, and retail. The horizontal or the x-axis depicts the year, and the vertical y-axis is square feet. So as you can see, it's remained relatively flat over the past 15 years, increasing in total by only 1% from 2008 to 2022. And then during that time, just to break it down a little further, the total square footage of office increased by 6%. For industrial space, it decreased by 3%. Retail space increased by 4% over the last 15 years. Next slide. And while the supply of commercial space has remained relatively constant, Newmark vacancy rate data indicates demand has fluctuated. Again, the year is depicted on the x-axis, and the percent vacancy rate is on the y-axis. So most recently, vacancy rates decreased slightly between 2021 and 2022, after increasing quite significantly in 2020 due to the pandemic. And the mean vacancy rate over the past 15 years for office was 10.6%, for industrial 6.7%, and for retail, that mean vacancy rate for the past 15 years is 4.5%. Next slide. All right, and these graphs compare the low and high range of commercial lease rates in Boulder over the last 15 years. With, again, the year is on the x-axis here, and the lease rate per square foot on the y-axis. And I do want to call out that this data has not been adjusted for inflation. However, it's the one published and updated source that we could get for this type of data. So looking at these graphs, commercial lease rates over the past 15 years have also fluctuated and vary widely by submarket and the type of space. But in general, looking at these graphs, commercial lease rates from 2008 to 2022 show an overall increase in the lease rates for office, industrial, and retail. In 2021, rates were as high as $62 a square foot per year for retail space in Boulder. And while the highest lease rates for office and industrial declined, the highest rate for retail increased in 2022. And then it's important to call out the median rate. So for downtown Boulder in the fourth quarter of 2022 was $32 a square foot. Medians are not depicted on this slide. It's only the low and high. So I wanted to call out that data point there. And since this data does not account for inflation, I'd like to call out one other data point. The average annual growth rate for the high retail lease rates was 6% from 2008 to 2022, while the average inflation rate during that same period of time was 2.35%. So that tells us that retail lease rates are increasing quite significantly, even when taking inflation into account. And overall with this data, some key takeaways here are that the supply has remained fairly constant with fluctuations in demand, but an increase in the need for commercial space from 2021 to 2022. And undeniably, we're seeing a continuous increase in the cost of commercial space, particularly, again, that triple net. Next slide. So as part of our analysis, we also researched what other communities are doing as it relates to implementing formal affordable commercial programs. And I'll briefly run through each of these. In Portland, Oregon, an affordable commercial tenanting program referred to as Prosper Portland provides equitable access to space for emerging and small businesses in the form of reduced rent, tenant improvement contributions, and technical assistance. The Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh offers rent relief to small businesses through landlord grants, while in Oakland, Main Street Launch offers more affordable capital and small business loans. And then lastly, Detroit's Motor City Match program connects businesses with landlords to further facilitate accessibility to commercial space. So ultimately, as we look into the development of an affordable commercial program, it's important to consider best practices and strategies in other communities that may be facing a similar challenge of the cost of doing business in their cities. Next slide. And so again, most recently, the city partnered with the CU Real Estate Center to develop a proposal around this issue. So I'd now like to introduce Charles Biddle Porter, an MBA student at CU Leeds who is on the student project team. He'll present a brief overview of the team's research and findings and proposal for the city.
Thank you, Regan. Hello, everyone. Very honored to be here presenting my team's research to you all. So thank you very much for the opportunity. As Regan mentioned, I've been working alongside a few of my MBA and MSBA classmates for the past year, exploring what affordable commercial means and working towards developing an affordable commercial assistance program that we've called Thrive Boulder for the city to potentially implement to help small businesses and NGOs. So I would do my best to stay high level with this, but I'm very happy to sort of take any questions at the end with Regan. And I believe you've all received our report in your memo. So feel free to ask any sort of clarifications towards the end. But in our research, we interviewed a number of sources, both public and private, a few of whom are actually on the call today. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us. We also examined successful programs such as Prosper Portland across the US to learn sort of what had worked and what, more importantly, what hadn't worked for them. And sort of the takeaways that we could put into our own program. The primary goals in our research were to address the increasing cost of space for businesses in Boulder, to offer support to small businesses and NGOs, to increase the diversity and inclusion rates of Boulder's commercial districts. So to dive into the program itself, we've broken Thrive Boulder into two key components. The first is that of space. And this would see the city enter into a master lease agreement for a unit on the market. And they would then sublease this to micro-tenants. And these micro-tenants would be small businesses and NGOs. The city would be able to secure a lease that some of these small businesses wouldn't be able to, for example. So that's one of the advantages straight off as well. And the tenants we said should be specifically from Boulder, the Boulder area. This is obviously a program to implement by the city of Boulder. The lease runtime we believe should run for about 5 years, at which point we feel the city should conduct a formal review. This review would either see sort of the current participants be able to re-enroll and continue with their support from the city, or the opportunity maybe be given to new small businesses and NGOs that are in need. Although we would like to see all participants organically graduate this program within that sort of 5-year period. We found this also addresses the need for smaller space as well as more affordable space that this micro lease and master lease would offer. It's important to note that tenants will be paying the market rate for their space. Where we've made this affordable is not directly in subsidizing their rent, but instead looking at the costs on top of the lease. So largely sort of under operating costs, for example. This is your tenant improvement, your common area maintenance, your property management. And with our model that we developed during our research, we found that under our recommendations, we could reduce the overall cost of a lease by around 20%, which is quite significant for these small businesses. And that brings it down to sort of 80% overall. Although we did design our model to be dynamic, as you want to scale the program, you may want to increase or reduce funding sort of as you see fit. and the model that we created allows for that. Local examples of this sort of space in the city of Boulder itself would include Boxcar Coffee, which some of you may be familiar with. There's 3 businesses in that space, Avanti or Rosetta Hall. And it's a similar sort of idea as to what we'll be going with here. The second component that we put into Thrive Boulder is an education and training component. Now, this component will be free to all participants, and it's not exclusive. It will be available to all small businesses and NGOs in Boulder. This is going to be a collection of largely existing resources that the city already offers or that are maybe offered by NGOs, collecting them all under one umbrella and creating new partnerships or leaning on current partnerships, such as with CU. We envision sort of optional courses being run by CU, and through discussions with some of the CU faculty, we've gauged there is interest in potentially helping put on quarterly seminars for small businesses and NGOs. These seminars could be sort of on any topic that is deemed relevant or voted for by the small business and NGOs to make sure that they're receiving sort of the education training that is relevant to them and that they feel is important and necessary. But I've done a high level of review sort of out of it as I possibly can. I'm going to head back to Regan. And again, I'm very happy to sort of try and answer any of the questions that you may have. I know that there's quite a lot of detail that we can go into with this, but I'm going to pass back to Regan to let her continue with her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And I would just like to add that, findings from the CU proposal and report do align with suggestions from some city plans, such as the citywide retail study, which indicates that one way to decrease tenant occupancy costs is to reduce the size of the space being leased. So this is certainly something that's been of interest, or at least discussed within the city for some time. All right, I'm going to try to take us home quickly here. We can go to the next slide. So now that I've outlined existing policies, factors, best practices, and recent research efforts, I want to kind of tie it all together and narrow in on the issues at hand in our current focus. So the cost burden of commercial lease rates continues to be a challenge. This isn't a new challenge that the city is facing. The cost of doing business in Boulder and loss of retail diversity as a result of that has been an ongoing topic that city staff and council have contemplated for several years now. Several existing efforts, but time to formalize our approach. As outlined previously, the city has undertaken various projects and initiatives to tackle this challenge, and the development of this type of program is outlined in existing city plans. The Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan highlights the importance of a diverse economic base, explicitly stating that the city and county will further explore and identify methods to better support local businesses by addressing rising costs of doing businesses in the city, including the cost of commercial space. CU research led to creative and unique ideas that staff would like to explore further. We're really excited about our recent partnership with the CU Real Estate Center and the student team and the ideas and proposals that came out of that research project. So let's explore the strategies that were brought to the table further. And then lastly, we do have a pool of funding available through American Rescue Plan Act funds to address the high cost of doing business in the city, as well as central area general improvement dollars, in district dollars in capital funding. So let's leverage those resources to build a program that'll have a lasting impact. And I'll touch on those funding resources more in our recommendations. We can go to the next slide. And on to the next. So staff has outlined some next steps that we think we should prioritize if council supports the development of an affordable commercial program. These include partnering with a program administrator to help with the development and administration of a program, conduct thoughtful and intentional community engagement, and utilize those ARPA as well as those CAGED funding resources that are available to us. And I'll touch on each of these more in depth, so we can go to the next slide. So we recommend that as a 2024 annual work plan item, Community Vitality develop an RFP to partner with a community organization to assist us in developing and administering an affordable commercial pilot program. The intent would be to work with an organization with experience in providing opportunities for local entrepreneurs and small businesses to help us further explore the concept of potentially offering shared commercial space or multiple strategies to address the burden of high commercial lease costs. And this could include assisting staff in developing program goals, identifying commercial leasing sites for a pilot program, etc. And there are organizations in the city already doing this type of work, so let's leverage existing efforts to formalize our approach. For example, the Boulder County Farmers Market is a key organization administering a marketplace for local entrepreneurs and farmers to sell their local food and goods to the community. This concept could easily be replicated, but within a commercial space for small local retailers. And ultimately, given the nature of this type of work, partnering with a local organization would provide an opportunity to increase city staff capacity while providing that additional expertise and perspective. Next slide. And this ties in and leads to our next recommendation, which would occur as part of the scope of partnering with an organization, which is the community engagement component. It's important to note that this has been an ongoing discussion with several stakeholders and organizations within the community for years. Boulder Chamber, the Small Business Development Center, again, the farmers market. There's this broad interest from various local leaders to address the cost burdens to local small businesses. And so let's continue to engage with our civic leaders, but also the broader community. We'd utilize the city's racial equity instrument to determine potential benefits and burdens of a proposed program and develop strategies that advance racial equity within our city. We'd engage with our community connectors and residents to elevate underrepresented voices in the development of this new program. And we'd conduct broader outreach, not only with local organizations, but community members at large, to ensure that what we're developing is meeting our community's needs and desires and contributing to the vitality of our city. Next slide. And then lastly, as part of our recommendations, we'd like to utilize these funding resources. So we have the approximately $380,000 identified in ARPA funding to develop a pilot program responding to the rising cost of commercial space, which needs to be encumbered by the end of 2024. And the city's budget also includes $100,000 annually in funding through the Central Area General Improvement District to support capital investments that would help address the affordability of commercial space in the district. So the current balance of that funding is $400,000. We see this as a key opportunity to implement a pilot program within the boundaries of CAGID and utilize those funding resources. Next slide. We can go on to the next one. All right, next steps. So similar to Hill revitalization, this would be a cross-departmental effort with community vitality sort of taking the lead. So we'd coordinate with other city staff and departments to identify roles and responsibilities and work plan items beginning in 2024. We'd like to develop an RFP to bring on this community partner, this program administrator, encumbering funds ideally by the end of the year and beginning that work in 2024. So with that said, we'd really like to start working on this in the near term, drafting and finalizing that RFP as an immediate next step in 2023. We'd conduct broad community engagement, again, utilizing the racial equity instrument. And then lastly, of course, stakeholder check-ins with boards and commissions, with council, with updates likely being brought to the table by Q2 of 2024, with the goal of receiving feedback and direction to ensure success of a pilot program. Next slide. All right, we can go to the last slide here, just circling back on those questions for council. Does council support staff's exploration into the development of an affordable commercial pilot program? And does council have any questions about next steps?
Thanks, Regan. Thanks, Charles. That was really great. Let's do this. Let's see if we have any questions about the presentation for Regan or Charles first. And then after we get through questions, we can start answering your questions. I see Tara's hands up, and then Lauren, and then Mark.
Real quick, Charles, why did you decide on 5 years?
This was where we came to. I can't point to a specific piece of research. We felt that 5 years was a good number. We also looked at 7 years, but there's not a hard stop at that 5-year mark. We felt that 5 years was long enough to be able to look back at business records, financial records, and be able to establish whether there has been positive growth, whether there has been change, but also wanted to ensure that the city wasn't locked in for a long duration, for if a business maybe is stagnating and isn't growing. We sort of landed on 5 years being the magic number for that. Yeah.
Tara, Lauren, then Mark.
Thank you. In our packet, there was a mention that that businesses would need to be 2 years old and make $92,000 a year, I think, to be eligible. And I was wondering where those numbers came from, and also kind of have a question of, that there was also a shoe repair business was brought up as like an example of a business. And I just wonder if we're not encouraging a shoe repair person to incubate their business like in their residence or something like that, that is a little problematic because of the chemicals associated with that.
Thank you for those questions. And I think the criteria that you're referencing was from the CU proposal, the $92,000 annual revenue, and then being in business for at least 2 years. And Charles, maybe you can speak a little bit more as to how you came up with those numbers. At this point, they're really just suggestions, and we would certainly conduct community engagement and work with a community partner to establish that criteria.
Yes, I can. So those numbers we were looking at a pilot program and felt that if we could give some guidance as to the businesses you should be looking for that, specifically for that pilot, we set the 2 years there because we wanted for a pilot program for our first ever instance of this to make sure that we felt we want the businesses, naturally want all businesses to succeed, but we want the businesses to be in a position where they are established and they do have a couple of years of operating. This could then potentially be changed after a successful proof of concept, but we felt this would give a better chance to the pilot of success. The 92,000, that was we worked backwards. So for this, we deemed in the selection criteria that for a business to be in need of affordable space, the cost of rent to that business should be 40% or greater of their gross revenue. So we then looked, the exact number we looked at, I'm afraid it's slipping me, but I believe it's in the report. We worked backwards and we looked at what the average rent is per square foot, and basically worked out, okay, how much revenue will they need to be making in order for it to be 40%? And that's the number that we came to.
Thank you.
Awesome. Mark, then Matt.
Looking at the total occupancy cost at 75% across the city, the numbers in the memo, they range from $30 to $48. That's discounted. Have you projected what kind of tenants are going to be able to afford even that? I mean, are we simply going to get law firms and accounting firms at a discount, or are we going to get the kinds of businesses that we would really like to foster and give an opportunity to? I mean, it's not as if the rent is going to be negligible.
I apologize, Councilmember Wallach. Can you repeat that, or where in the memo were you referencing those occupancy costs?
I don't have the page handy. I just have my notes. There was a discussion of occupancy costs across the city by different districts: Boulder Valley Regional Center, UGID, Basemar, Central Area General Improvement District. And when you take 75% of those numbers, you get rents, as I said, between $30 and $48. And I'm just, even at that level of discount, I'm concerned that we're going to not be subsidizing businesses we want to subsidize, but in effect, just making cheaper office space for more well-established businesses.
And
Yeah.
so just to clarify, sorry, Regan, is this in terms of sort of the program that we were putting forwards, you're talking about in terms of participants and making sure that it is businesses that we want there, that they're in need? Is that sort of the question that you're asking?
That is in fact the question.
Okay, yeah. So within the selection criteria, we looked at other areas as well, and other requirements. We also felt that a selection committee should be established for this, and that there are the general guidelines, sort of the 40% of your revenues as cost of rent, 2 years in business, more than one employee. Outside of that, we also want to consider a big part of this as well was choosing those businesses, the businesses that are important to Boulder, that whole sort of Boulder's identity, the businesses that make Boulder Boulder. And that's an important part, but it is quite hard to quantify. So we felt the best way to do this would be creating a selection committee to oversee sort of the selection for the participants into those units. And they would also naturally need to consider sort of the business mix of the area so that they aren't upsetting another business next door, for example, if they're going in. But we felt, and we've spoken with a number of people, a number of stakeholders who willingly said they would happily sort of sit on a committee to try and help with this.
But you're not at all concerned about picking winners and losers in a commercial real estate context? I mean, that's really what we're doing here. You can set out some numerical guidelines, but at the end of the day, we're picking winners and losers. And I'm not sure that's our appropriate function.
Yeah, no, I completely hear you, and we would want to approach this in the most equitable way possible. I mean, I think about the program Pop Up Denver and how they have a selection process, an equitable one that they follow. And so part of this process of developing a program would be looking into already existing programs and what are the most equitable ways that we can go about this.
Well, I'm happy to have you try to put together a program. I'm just, raising some issues. Have you identified ongoing funding after the first year or so? I mean, is this going to be do we have a source of permanent financing other than the city's general fund, or is this under the God will provide concept?
Yeah, thank you for the question. At this point, in addition to the ARPA funds, we have the ongoing $100,000 annually in CAGED funding for capital investments as it relates to addressing affordable commercial programs. And Chris, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I would note that those are not ongoing funds. That's why we're exploring a pilot first, that we have a 5-year pilot. We certainly, part of the criteria of the creation of this program would be to focus on revenue neutral or revenue positive in partnering with these, the businesses that are selected to occupy a space. We certainly would not want to be exploring a program that's going to create an ongoing general fund burden, but rather a program that is designed to create that community benefit, if not just in the general improvement district, for that long-term funding strategy.
And well, at $100,000 a year, how many, let's say, 2,000 square foot spaces could we actually accommodate? I mean, it doesn't seem like that's going to stretch very far.
that is a question that will yet to be answered through the development of the program that we will explore those types of questions with you all in the months to come.
I would request that you explore those questions because I think it's important for the viability of the program or its general application.
Thanks, Mark. Matt?
Thanks, Bob. Just real quick, I mean, on the point of winners and losers, we're seeing mostly losers because our market is unsustainable. So I'd rather us be in the business where we're helping those have a chance at succeeding. So I'm not sure I agree with that sort of dire state. I'd take something over nothing. My question has to do with sort of the market rate, and it sort of pegs a little bit with where Mark was going about, is that sustainable? And I'm wondering, if we own this, could we then implement our own sort of either rent control or stabilization? Because I'm worried that if we peg it market rate and yet we'll still get some of that affordability on the other side, I'm worried if the market catches fire, we're taking everyone else on a further unsustainable journey. And so I'm wondering if we can peg things as a percentage of market to keep it pretty close, but not quite there, and how we can do that. And was that part of any of the assessment from Charles and his team on how we could implement tools that are prohibited at state law for other things, but I think we would have the ability to do ourselves? But maybe I'm wrong that we couldn't do that, but I was under the assumption we could if we wanted to.
That's certainly something we could look into. I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm not sure if it's something we could do or not, but at this point, the proposal, at least from the CU team, is kind of just talking about subdividing larger spaces into these smaller spaces and covering those overhead operating costs, which would ultimately make it more affordable. But that's certainly something we could look into, because I understand that point.
Yeah, I mean, just 0.5% less than market may get us to a more sustainable thing. Like, it doesn't have to be much, but it can be just as much to make people a little more competitive and feel a little more secure financially as they try to enter into this pilot.
Right.
Thanks, Matt. Nicole, then Rachel.
Yeah, I just have one quick question. Thanks again for the presentation. I'm expecting that we're not going to be too committed to the exact details that we've been asking questions about, like the size, the length of the lease, how much percent we're doing, until we get through the engagement process that will include a much broader range of people. I just wanted to make sure that's the correct assumption.
Precisely. Yes, there is no developed program at this point. We're really just seeking support and direction on moving forward with developing a pilot program. So it would, of course, include that thoughtful, intentional community engagement, partnering with a local community or organization that has this type of experience to actually finalize these sort of details.
Great. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you all come up with. And thanks for working to address this issue. It's a really important one.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Rachel? Rachel, you're still on mute. There you go.
Thanks, Bob. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
My computer is really glitching. Am I here or not here?
Mostly
I can hear you. Yeah.
If you're not here. I'm hearing like what I'm hearing.
Just plow ahead.
I'll circle back to me. I'm gonna can you hear me now? I just heard you. I'm sorry. Bad internet on top of everything else tonight for me. I'm gonna mute.
Okay, Rachel, we'll come back to you maybe when we do comments. I don't see other questions. I do have two questions, and these probably fall into the category of I don't know, which is perfectly fine answer. But if you don't know, Charles or Regan, I'd ask you to consider putting this into the bucket of things you're going to look at. But if you know tonight, that'd be great too. One, Regan, you spoke early in the presentation about the drivers for high commercial rents, including real estate taxes, increasing costs, especially in an inflationary environment, and just the landlord's general desire to have a return on investment for its property. I wonder if there's a fourth factor here, and that's commercial linkage fee. About 5 or 6 years ago, we put in place what was at least at the time the second highest commercial linkage fee in the country, where we charged developers of commercial property a pretty hefty per foot rate, one-time pretty hefty per foot rate. And I get the fact that that was only applied to new commercial construction, but the builders of those commercial construction presumably needed to have higher rents to cover that commercial linkage fee that they paid on a one-time basis, which in turn could have had an impact on the market, even those properties that were existing. Do we have any sense right now, and if not, could we add it to our checklist about to what extent commercial linkage fees are driving high costs in Boulder?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and we can certainly do more analysis on that. I mean, just initial gut reaction, I would say yes, especially if we have the second highest commercial linkage fee rate in the country. But we haven't done any in-depth analysis or engagement on that, but we can certainly add it to our marching orders.
Thanks, Regan. And this probably the second question of my two probably falls in that category as well. You had some pretty dramatic numbers as far as the increase in rates of rents, and I know they weren't adjusted for inflation, but we could still, we can kind of back into a 3 or 4% inflation rate, kind of figure out what that is in real dollars. But I'm kind of curious as to how we compare on a percentage basis. I know Boulder's always been more expensive than its neighboring cities, but I'm kind of curious as to how we compare on a percentage basis to our peer cities. And I'm thinking our peer cities just up and down the Front Range, because that's really who we're competing with for commercial tenants, Longmont and Denver and some of the other towns up and down the Front Range that businesses could choose if they were trying to decide, am I going to go to Boulder, or am I going to go to Westminster or Denver or Longmont or whatever? And while our rates start at a baseline that's higher, I'm wondering just from a percentage standpoint, are we high and going up faster, or are we high and going up at roughly the same rate as our peer cities in the Front Range? And again, if you don't know, put it on your checklist.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but we can certainly look into it for the development of this program. Chris, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, well, I know that Charles and his team did take a look at that. I'm not sure if Charles is ready to speak to it right this moment, but we can certainly refresh our stats and thinking around that question, because it is important.
Yeah, we did look to it, but I have to be honest, I can't recall the exact findings. It was part of our sort of preliminary market research. I believe we included some of it in the memo, but yeah, I can't recall the exact answers, if I'm honest right now.
That's fine. That's fine. Well, as you look into this, if you get a green light from council, it'd be good to have that as part of your report. Rachel, do you want to give it another go with any questions, and then we'll turn it to comments?
Okay, well, I kind of tried to rethink of them as can you hear? Well, first, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. So two things. First, often when we're talking about adding something to the work plan, we have a lot of discussion about trade-offs, and that's a big, like usually you got to let go of something if we're adding something. And this feels like something that we are a little bit revisiting, kind of not precisely, but from something we looked at 2021. And I remember feeling pretty bummed that staff had done a lot of work on community benefits look at affordable commercial. So I would be, I guess, just two things. I like some explanation, if possible, about how this is how this got from planning to community vitality, and like it does seem also still tethered to planning, but we're not talking about trade-offs there. And if we are kind of able to kick things over to community vitality, like, does council have a choice in what we to
Rachel, we're kind of losing you, but I think.
What else might community vitality be? And everybody's frozen.
Yeah, we got the gist of it, I think, Rachel.
So I might take a shot at that.
Can carry that forward?
I'm going to try to take a shot at answering what I think I heard in that question is related to staff capacity and passing the baton of this work, knowing that this has been a long-standing conversation in the community and largely carried through conversations around development and the impacts of higher density commercial development in the city and the impacts that has on viability of existing businesses that get displaced. So community vitality, knowing that our role in the community in supporting that micro business vitality component, particularly in our general improvement districts, but also in the city as a whole. We saw an opportunity based on working with the ARPA dollars and knowing that some dollars had been set aside by my predecessor on this topic. And that's why we're here today. We do see some space in our work plan to try a pilot program, and we want to explore that and make that happen. So delighted to have Regan here and our partnership with CU to help make it a reality, because we do know and acknowledge that it's coming up in a lot of our sub-area plans. The East Boulder Community Plan calls out the concept of affordable commercial as a strategy to mitigate the challenges of redevelopment. But we need to have better parameters and a better understanding of what do we mean when we say that. Community Vitality has an opportunity right now to try something. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to solve all of our problems in this area. But we're excited at this current opportunity, and we'll see where it goes.
Thanks, Chris. Rachel, do you have any other questions?
Well, I'll try and be brief. I guess I appreciate that, and I'm supportive. I'm still, again, just I don't know that it makes perfect sense for us to not weigh in on I guess if Community Vitality has like extra time to add to the work plan, like what are the other options for what we might want to look at? Like I was talking about saying safe outdoor spaces, which really does have an impact on, businesses in the areas that Community Vitality works in. And like, is that a space that Community Vitality could be doing some work? And so sometimes it feels like this is something that we are constrained on in terms of, staff time and limits, and sometimes it seems to like drop out. So my question is just how does this with some other discussions where we have to do the trade-offs? So actually,
I'm happy to take a stab.
Probably
at
more
it.
for Nuria.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take a stab at it. So a couple things, right? There's a variety of work plans, right? There's a lot of things that staff are doing that are part of their work plan. What we ask when we go into retreats or the check-ins with council is, what are your main priorities, right? And we often use that sort of iceberg metaphor for whatever it's work, that there's a lot of stuff going on in the city that does not necessarily go to council priority areas. And there are different pieces of some of the council priorities and the work plans that we have that impact different departments in different ways, right? This is something that Community Vitality certainly has heard through their community conversations with local businesses. And there's a need. There was a great opportunity to partner with CU, and they have an opportunity to build that into some of the work that they are already doing. Slightly different than perhaps when we're talking about adding something to, I'll pick on PNDS because Brad's not here today. But when we're talking about something in that vein, that they have so many council priorities that they are trying to bring into fruition. So there is a lot of work going on in the city, and that conversation about trade-offs, and certainly we'll have the conversation on safe outdoor spaces is less involved with this department, but requires that when it involves a department like HHS that has so much on their plate. And so some of that it's more art than science, and it just depends on what it is and the capacity for staff to take on certain initiatives.
Thanks, Nuria. And Rachel just texted me that she's now offline. Her box still shows up, but she's been booted. She said she's going to check out for the night. Let me suggest this as we roll into Nicole, Mark, and Tara for their final questions. Why don't we combine questions and comments, if the three of you don't mind, just ask your final questions and then roll right into there's really just one question, which is, does council support staff's exploration and development of an affordable commercial pilot program? So if you could wrap up your questions, just say, yes or no and why, and then we'll come back to anybody else who hasn't commented. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and Nuria, I think you pretty much just answered the question that I was going to ask in response to Rachel's point, which is that we're not talking here about the council work plan and adding anything to the council work plan. This is really staff kind of given that our staff are super creative and innovative and just sort of recognizing that this is a need, it's something that they need to be working on to enact their department mission. This is something that they are looking at. I just wanted to be clear that I'm understanding that correctly.
I think that is correct. And sometimes when we are moving forward with new programs, we want to get your feedback. We want to make sure that we're listening to some of the conversations you are likely having in community. But this is an opportunity for some work that is, I think, overdue a bit in terms of how do we support our smaller businesses in community, and a proposal in partnership with CU that staff is trying to bring forward, and wanted to hear some feedback.
Well, thank you. Then yes, I do support moving forward with this project. I appreciate the collaborative aspect of it. I appreciate all the plans for engagement to firm this up a little bit and bring it back to us. Glad we're going to be applying the racial equity instrument here and talking to businesses out there. And I just want to echo, I'm hearing similar things to what you all are hearing. And that's especially true for our minority women-owned businesses, people who would like to open businesses, but the price of space is just prohibitive and they can't, and we're losing out on a lot of innovation and creativity because of that. So I'm really excited about all of this. One of the things, and I'm just going to raise this just as something to think about. I would love for us to start thinking not just how we are doing more to support women and minority-owned businesses, but how are we supporting businesses that are in line with the mission and the goals that we have in the city. So businesses, for example, that are helping us move toward being more of a circular economy, helping meet some of our climate goals, like zero waste businesses, those kinds of things too. I think this could be a really interesting opportunity to start bringing in some of that kind of thinking of, is there a way that we're not just incentivizing kind of the type of people that we would like to be creating businesses, but the types of things that we see a need for now and into the future. And I just kind of want to give out a shout out to our financial team because I think the work that they did around the CCRS tax and thinking about how to implement that engagement work, in my mind, was really well done. And I'm really looking forward to, I expect something similar is going to come out here, and I'm just so excited to see what you all come up with. So enthusiastic, yes, thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Mark, final questions and then roll into your comment.
Well, not a question. If Community Vitality has the bandwidth to do this, I am more than happy to have them be as creative as they can. I just want to point something out, however, in 2021, the proposals that we did not move forward on were based upon landlords offering discounts on their rental levels in exchange for consideration in terms of commercial development linkage fees. But it was the landlords that were providing the discounts to tenants. The major shift in this proposal is that you're simply saying let the city pay for it. And that's an interesting shift, but strikes me as a program, if you bring it into being on a large scale, is going to be quite expensive to us. And it's just another program that we are moving forward with unidentified sources of funding. I thought the prior proposal in 2021 did not strike the proper balance between what we were getting and what we were giving up in commercial development linkage fees. But in some ways, I might prefer it to simply turning to the city and say, you pay. That's a very different concept than what we did a couple of years ago. And it seems to me it's not the most imaginative way of going about this. Having us pay for stuff is sort of our default response to everything. And I'm not sure that's the appropriate thing to do here, despite the fact that we all want to provide more affordable commercial space. I'm just not sure you've hit on the magic formula yet. And I would say go back and keep considering and let's get a program that's going to work for us in a more sophisticated way than simply saying the city will write the check because we were always writing the check. So I urge you to do this. I urge you to move forward, but I'm not sure that you've really hit it out of the park quite yet. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Tara and then Aaron.
Well, sorry to disagree, Mark. I think this was absolutely fantastic, and I'm so excited. Charles, I'm so excited about so many things you said. One of them is the tenants graduating, and the other one that is very exciting is the education part of this whole thing. But isn't it true that if we charge market rate, that the cost won't be so bad for the city? I mean, isn't that the reason why we're charging market rate, so we don't lose money?
That's exactly right. And that's why we put that in there, because we didn't want it to be a huge burden on the city's finances. We set a program where you would have the option to fund to whichever degree that you saw fit, but something that ultimately the city can get more attractive lease terms. And just by simply breaking the space, for example, 2,000 square foot space into 4 pieces, it's more affordable for all 4 of those businesses that are in that space, because they can share the cost themselves. So that's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. So it won't cost us, hopefully, anything. Maybe it'll be just like a no, just a net cost, no difference. Anyway, I love Avanti and I love Rosetta Hall. Those are my favorite. They're so innovative. And this to me sounds so exciting. There is this shopping center in mid-Florida I went to like 20 years ago. I think it's called the Flea Market. And it's exactly this concept. And it'll give the opportunities to people that have not had these opportunities, like Nicole said, because they have great ideas, but there's just no way for people to do anything with them. And I believe that if we remove some of the burdens, the rules, the obstacles, all these things, businesses will surprisingly be very creative. And so I think I'm so excited. This is my second. I was excited about the first thing we talked about. I'm just as excited about this. I'm happy to hear that we have the staff capacity. I also want to bring up that I'm pretty sure we have talked about this as a council, that we have been talking about finding ways to have a commercial space that's affordable for like 2 years or a year and a half. And so I think this is a great opportunity, and I'm thrilled that you guys are taking a part of it. And I want to end with, we always talk about us being more welcoming as a city. And so I think this is a great opportunity to do that.
May I colloquy with you on that for a moment?
I'm just kidding. You can't.
I think that the triple net portion of any lease is a very considerable expense. It is not going to be no cost to the city. It's going to be a subsidy by the city, unless we're buying the building and avoiding the triple net cost. And that's an extreme expense to the city. But if we're simply leasing it, somebody's paying the triple net portion of that lease, whether it's real estate taxes, utilities, etc. And if we don't pass that on to our tenants, which obviously we don't want to do, we are paying. So it is not really accurate to say that it will be no cost to us.
So Charles, what do you think?
Hey, folks, let's not have a debate. Let's just each person. Charles is not a referee here. Let's just Tara said her piece. Mark, you counted it. It's 9:30, and we promised ourselves we'll be done at 9:30. So let's hear from Aaron, Matt, Lauren. If Junie wants to weigh in, I'll have a comment, and let's wrap it up. Aaron.
Great. No, I really commend you all for this work. I think this is an exciting program. I think it's very creatively designed and thought out. So yes, I'm definitely in support. And just wanted to mention an example of that we can maybe draw some inspiration in. Is there like what they call them farmers markets in like the Atlanta, North Carolina area, which are, big buildings, and then they have little stalls with little businesses and usually food-based businesses. Or I think about the incredibly vibrant Mexican markets, where again, small stalls in a bigger space. And so I think this could be a really great opportunity for some members of our immigrant communities who might have a harder time affording startup costs for their own space. So I think that could be a good kind of inspiration and focus for us as well. So anyway, I really like where you're going and look forward to seeing this move into action.
Thanks, Aaron, Matt, and Lauren.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I think we're headed in the right direction, and I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and intention to get us going somewhere, noticing the need. I'll Staff, you've done a great job, but I'll say a special kudos to Charles and his team with CU Boulder. And I'll just say that this should be the norm. I think we should be leveraging our partners at the university and departments with expertise and engaging what are clearly going to be some young, very successful professionals once they leave their education. And so if it's not here in other departments, I would just love to see us expand that. So Nuria, however you can help foster that. I think this is a great thing for us to keep doing. So Charles and your team, thanks for blazing the trail, and I hope we get to keep it going. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Matt. Lauren?
Yeah, I echo what Matt just said. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us and putting this whole presentation together. We always talk about wanting to partner with CU more, and it's really exciting to see it happen. I love this idea. I also want to +1 Nicole's mentioning of, maybe also looking at businesses that are doing things like supporting our circular economy goals. Oh, it's late. But then I also just wanted to bring up that, because Brad's not here and PNDS is so slow and doesn't have anything to work on. If I love this idea of the smaller commercial spaces and that sort of natural affordability. That's sort of what we're looking at a lot on the residential side. Is there any way that we can prioritize developers doing that on the commercial side? Because I think, I've seen a lot of our commercial spaces right now have been designed to only be subdivided into fairly large spaces. And I think that is not something we want to see taking over all of our new commercial space. Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren. Junie, and then I'll go, and I think we'll be done.
I just want to say, since you called on me, Bob, thank you for the presentation. I thought it was great, and I support the direction of staff, and that's all I want to add for tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Junie. That was nice and concise. We appreciate that. I'll just maybe summarize my comments into 4 C's. I wrote down 4 C's. And this is the things I'd like to learn from staff as they kind of drill into this. First C is causes. What are the causes of high rents? I mentioned commercial linkage fees could be one of them, could be other causes. I'd like to understand better what are the causes of high rents. Number 2, comparative. I understand that we're more expensive than other cities, but are we going up faster at the same rate as other cities? And so that would be helpful for me. Third is the cost. Somebody's going to, if there's a subsidy here somewhere, somebody's going to pay for it, whether it's the landlord, because we talked about that a couple of years ago, maybe it's the city. I just want to understand big picture costs, because I think somebody asked a really good question. Well, just if you subsidize 2,000 square feet, and you only have $100,000 to spend, that doesn't go very far. So what would the costs be to the city or whoever's going to pay for it? And then the 4th C, final C, is consistency. Which is my cheater way of saying sustainability. Once we back into the cost, where if it's coming from the city, where is it going to come from? Is it 100,000 a year? Is it $1 million a year? What is it? Because we have a lot of subsidy programs out there. We just approved a guaranteed income program for low-income families, and if we're going to have a program that's going to be sustainable, I know we're going to have a 5-year pilot we're talking about, but where is the money going to come from after that? So I'd like to hear all of that as part of the initial study. Those are my comments. You're right at 9:32. We're only 2 minutes over. Any important, you got to say them, because you're going to regret it tomorrow morning, comments. Okay, good. Thank you for cooperation. Charles, thank you so much for being here. We really, really appreciate it. Regan, you pitched a doubleheader, all 18 innings. That's fantastic. Welcome to the city, and you did a great job. Nuria and Chris, any final comments?
I think just thank you for your feedback. And I assume I speak on behalf of Chris too, that we got great information, great feedback. We will come back to you at some later date as we continue to move this forward, but appreciate you joining this journey with us.
Great. Well, great job, guys. I think we're adjourned for the night. See you all next week.
Great job. Thanks, Bob.